Fala, galera da TV Maldita, live histórica para o povo brasileiro aqui, para todos do mundo que estão vendo. Já já a gente vai falar em inglês aqui, mas eu quero só falar para vocês que eu já expliquei para o Nico como é que vai ser o negócio do Superchat aqui. E aí o seguinte, vocês vão mandar as perguntas, mas a gente tem perguntas muito legais para o Nico. Então, assim, o Gilson que vai estar controlando isso. Se as perguntas não forem legais, elas não vão entrar. Mas todo o superchat que vocês derem vai ir para a União Musical. Good evening, Mr. Nico. How are you?
Good evening, lovely Aquiles and Gilson and all you wonderful fans out there. Thank you for joining us, and thank you very much, mate, for having me. You are a true hero. And
thank you so much.
Right now, I did say boys and girls to Aquiles before we went live. Congratulations on your Modern Drummer Award, mate. Well done with that. Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Well done.
And congratulations for you to enter to the Hall of Fame. More than deserved. More than deserved. I can't, to be honest, I can't imagine the heavy metal drumming without you. It's gonna be totally. It would be totally different. You know, it wouldn't be the same.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words, me old lovely. I would take as much as that as you're going to give me.
Okay, let me just tell you something. We are just getting started. We just have 1 minute, and we are having like the largest audience that we ever had in any of our almost 40 shows that we already did.
What an honor. Thank you.
That's amazing. Yeah. Okay, before we get started, let me just tell you the story of this little piece of wood here that I have here.
I know that. I've got some of those.
Yeah, exactly. So this one, I got this one when you play for the very first time in Porto Alegre. That was August 4th of 1992. And I remember that you throw away some sticks before the encore. And then, like, I was in the first row. When you are about to play, when you are in the middle of the song, I was fighting with 2 other guys and we were closer to the mixing console already. So basically, we were fighting, punching, screaming, hating each other. So we had this agreement, like, okay, let's split this in 3 parts. And I said, okay, I want the part that touched the right cymbal. So so basically, I'm carrying this for every part of the world, every time when I'm playing. This is my lucky amulet for 28 years, and I'm shaking when I'm telling this for you. So every time when I was touring with Hangar, with Angra, with Edu Falaschi, with Wasp, or with my Iron Maiden project, this was always in my backpack with my stage clothes. So this is giving me the lucky for 28 years. This is amazing.
Years. Well, listen, I don't want to blow your bubble out here, right? But if that was my left-hand drumstick, you've got the wrong end.
But I don't think so, because there's some marks here.
Oh, then that's good.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Well, yeah, contrary to belief, there are, in a pair of drumsticks, there's a left-handed stick, a left stick for the left hand, and a right stick for the right hand. And people, they scratch their head and go, no, that's not possible. But, you know, for years I played butt end out. You know,
I know.
The stick on my left hand. So, yeah, of course, you know, this is, boys and girls, I'm going to tell you a little story right now. It's very important to do with these drumsticks that I play. So, when I put my drumsticks down on my floor tom, one's fat end out, so I'm holding the nipple end, you know, the skinny nipple bit. You lot in America, if anyone's in the States, we call it an acorn. We call it a nipple, right? Anyway, you put your sticks down, right? Now, I don't know if you, Aquiles, when you've got guys you in your bands you play with, I don't know if Sammy Hager, when you play with him, is an up-and-coming budding drummer. But my singer, and most singers I've played with, think they can play the drums. So what they do is when you're not in the room or you go for a piss or something or go for a telephone break, they get on your drum kit, pick up the stick.
I want to play drums.
Go, hang on, this is the wrong way round. They end up playing it fat end in the hand on the left side, or they take a pair of sticks out, you know, and whatever, and play them normally. Now, the problem then is when I go and pick up that pair of sticks they've used the normal way round, I get splinters in my fingers or my hand. I've got that little piece of stick that is my right hand. So, boys and girls, if you're going to have a singer, a bass player, or a guitar player play your drum set, make sure they've got their own pair of sticks. Don't let them use yours that you usually use, because they may play them fat end out, both of them, and then you're really screwed.
Do you exchange the drumsticks when you are playing a show, like you play 4 songs with one pair, 5 more songs with other, or you just keep playing with one?
Yeah, what happens is, okay, the left-hand stick's not so bad. It doesn't wear out as quickly as the right stick, because I play left side and hit the cymbals, and I do tend to do a lot of rim shots when I play. I like the attack you get when you rim shot, even on the toms. But the right stick is getting more choked up and chipped up because of the cymbals. Although the angle of the cymbal is like pretty much like my hand is now, so it's not flat like Tommy Aldrich plays. Tommy has a dead horizontal cymbal. And you go through more sticks that way because you kind of, unless you come over the top of the cymbal like Ian Pace does when he's got that really flicky sort of. Anyway, so what I notice is they go light, and you can feel about 2 or 3 gram drop in a stick. Very rarely I'll throw a drumstick away because I feel like it's going to break. The Vic Firth, I get the medium hickory, which is not the middle of the tree, not the edge of the tree, but when I say not the centre. When I say middle, I mean the centre. There's 2, 3 different places they take the wood from, and the best place is like halfway across from the centre to the outside. They very, very rarely break. Very rarely break. When they do, it's like quite a surprise. But I will tend to feel the right hand one. I tend to get rid of more often than the left. Okay. But I might maybe do years ago. Funny you should say this, because years ago I used to go through hundreds of drumsticks. I'd get the order into Vic Firth, or before I went with Vic, I was using Shore sticks, and they go, "Oh, you're using so many drumsticks. You've ordered 300 pairs for your tour." Charlie, my drum tech, I say, "How many pairs of drumsticks did we go through last week?" He said, "Oh, 12." 12. And I'm like, "Oh, that's not too bad. That's like out of 4 gigs, so that's like an average of 3 pairs of sticks a show, So what happens is, when you probably think, well, you throw a fair few sticks away, every night. So what happens is, when I throw them behind me, Charlie keeps them. And rehearsal sticks, we keep those sticks to go on the road with. We use at the end of the night. So the ones I'm throwing may not have been used that night on that show. But they have definitely been used. So, I don't go through as many as I used to. But I find it a little light, and they feel spongy sometimes.
Yeah, I used to do this, like throwing away by the end of the show. But then when I was starting playing with Tony McAlpin, he told, "No, sign the sticks and put on the merch table. You're going to make some money." So I have been doing this.
Very, very astute young. Well, he's obviously a businessman, He's
exactly.
The man of the band. Well, that's funny, because a number of years ago, I went to see Deep Purple playing at Hammersmith Odeon, and I went in to see Ian before the show, and he's sitting there. He's got a box of drumsticks, and he's signing them all, and I'm going, "Well, that's weird. Why are you signing those before you're going to use them?" On a show, weren't you kind of, this brain was thinking, why do that before? Don't you sign them afterwards and give them to kids? "Oh, sir," he says, "I'm selling them." Why don't you? I'm like, you that hard up, you want to flog your sticks. But no, it's a good point. I mean, you can probably go to your stick company and get seconds. Drumsticks that like lighter,
different wood.
Yeah, so you go, "Oh, give me a second." We call those offcuts or seconds. I don't feel like I don't feel comfortable myself, you know, having that option to say to Vic first,
to sell.
Give me a bunch of drumsticks and I'm going to flog them. Give me like your wholesale price on them, because I don't pay for my drumsticks.
I know.
You know,
you shouldn't, of course.
It's amazing. It's the wrong way around, boys and girls, really. I think that when you find a great up-and-coming drummer, you should sort of go, here's, you know, 100 pairs of drumsticks for nothing, because, you know, you need that help. I mean, I can afford to buy my own stuff, you know, but of course, businesses, you know, companies aren't, you know, in the business to give away their stuff like that.
Okay.
But I find, I've always thought it's nice to be able to take care of these. You know, you see these young kids up and coming in bands that support. I mean, I remember going to, I think we were in Hungary way back when it was like in the early 80s, mid 80s, and there was this band. I can't remember how to pronounce the name of this band. And this guy had like, he must have had 12 cymbals on his drum set and like an 8-piece drum kit, and all of his cymbals were cracked, and he cut them out. I remember saying to this guy, I said, look, you know, you're obviously a massive Paisley fan. Oh, I love these cymbals. And I gave him a set of cymbals. And I phoned up, Thomas Paisley was alive then. And I phoned Thomas, I said, hey, mate, I've got this kid, you know, he's a stunning drummer, stunning player. So as an ambassador for Paisley, I can do that. So watch out, boys, girls. You might get lucky. I'm not pointing at you, Aquiles, because you've got and what beautiful. You still use the 900s, right? The Paisley 900s. Yeah. I know you've got all the different sets that you use, but the red one you got on your kit looked fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. I start using the 900 when Paisley relaunched them. Yeah. But I was missing the sound of my cymbals that I was playing for more than 10 years. So then I asked Eric and Kelly to make some special from me with some signatures, with some roots, with some 2002. So now you got a mishmash. Exactly. Yeah. And I got my sound back. And the last question about stick, do you test them to make sure which one are you using in each hands, or it doesn't matter? No. It's the same weight.
Well, the thing is that, excuse me, when they come out of factory match pairs. So if you use, you know, my left stick would be the normal way out, like normal people play. Notice I said normal people. You. Yeah,
because you are not normal.
So, you know, if you go on a, you know, like a tabletop or just something that's solid, or even a practice pad, and you play this, get the same value note on each hand. Okay. There'll pretty much be, there's a notation in each piece of wood. There's a note, like in a drum shell, au naturel, when you tap it, right? Now a drumstick has that natural note. Now, okay, if I turn my left stick around, which I prefer to do, it's a different note. It's deeper by the attack of hitting it at the other end. So, okay, I know they're matched. It doesn't matter if they're not really, to be very honest with you, because the left hand is going to dynamically be different from the right. So if I'm going to do a single stroke roll, and okay, so like, if you can hear that.
Sure.
You can hear that, right? I'm hitting the computer top.
Yeah.
Right, that's more even. Now my left hand, I have to hit harder.
Okay.
Right now, and then my right hand even harder to make it equal, because there's more weight on the that fat end of the drumstick. So it'll be like this.
Okay.
That's my right hand. That left hand's doing that, but with the weight, I'm still getting the dynamic value. So it does become a little bit more of a challenge, which over the years I can actually, I'm not getting like a flam effect by doing a single stroke roll.
True.
Yeah, you know, it's something that I've learned to be able to control. So, but the nice thing is when I turn the stick round the other way, which occasionally, not when I'm playing with Maiden, but when I'm doing other bits and pieces, I find that my left hand, I'm hitting too hard. So I'm getting that the left side, if you see what I'm saying. So it's a matter of controlling it. And But so the value of that piece of wood, I know they're a matched pair, but I don't have to go, oh, I want to hear that note out of that end of the drumstick. No.
Okay.
Does
so
that
NICKO,
make sense?
yes, perfect.
It's a load of BS for me, mate.
I can imagine. So now we're gonna start with the question. If you want to give like shorter responses, you know, you can get rid of this. You can get rid of this earlier.
Okay. Well, I was going to say you got the wrong bloke here. You start me off yapping, and
I know. This is
why
really
I don't do many interviews for the band, right? Because the interviewer, like, you got a bunch of questions, right? And the interview's got like 20 or 30 questions, and they go, so what about so and so and so and so? And I start rabbiting, and I go, by the way. And then I'll tell a story, and then that leads into another. And the bloke, I said, "What's the next question?" He said, "Well, you've answered them all."
Yeah, exactly. I'm pretty much sure that this is what's gonna happen. So let's start with the beginning. So what was happening in your life when COVID-19 appeared? Have you had many changes to your plans and for the band plans?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Well, I think everybody has been affected. Everyone. I mean, hats off to all of our frontline people. First of all, I think we're all in agreement. They're doing a wonderful job. I know Brazil's been hit pretty hard. Maybe not as hard as the US right now, and certainly not as hard as Florida, because there's this massive spike come back, and it's kind of frightened me a little bit. But to answer the question about how it changes, yes. Everything changed within a heartbeat, well, within a month of everybody, around the world saying in, late December and early January, oh, there's this terrible pandemic coming. And certain countries reacted, suitably quickly. Mm-hmm. Others didn't. Now, it doesn't matter who did and who didn't. I mean, we still have this worldwide pandemic.
Yeah.
So Maiden were due to do our first show on part 2 of the Legacy of the Beast tour, which was going to kick off down in Perth on May the 1st this year. Mm-hmm. We were going to have a couple of weeks rehearsal down there. My wife and I were getting ready to leave, funny enough, on April the 4th. And then at the end of February... March, it was like, no, you're not traveling. The tour's, we didn't know our tour was actually postponed until the countries that we were supposed to be playing in actually mandated that there was going to be no more shows.
Okay.
I mean, we couldn't actually say, let's cancel the tour. We had to wait for the various countries to say, you can't come over. No one's actually playing. Nobody's traveling. So, yeah, it really affected me in that respect, because here's the thing. In late February, when it all started to come out, and I actually thought, so I said to my wife, we ain't going to be doing anything at least till June. Maybe we can postpone the tour and pick it up after that. But as we all know, we're in July and we still haven't got a vaccine yet. But I was working out. I was walking every day. I was working on my drums. I was playing an hour and a half every day, playing the songs, running through the songs, doing solos, getting my stamina back. I went on a sugar-free diet. I stopped eating potatoes, pasta. I was eating a bit of red meat, mainly fish and salads, right? I lost a half a stone in weight, right? I was 178 pounds and I was down to 170. So that's half a stone, right? And I was feeling pretty good. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I was like really working hard to get myself back playing, because I'm getting a few years older than you. And you, Gilson. I don't know what you're thinking about that. Anyway, so there's this thing, right? So this COVID malarkey hits us. And so what's happened is I've put all that weight on plus, right? And that's the one big thing that's really okay. My sort of life when I'm off the road at home is pretty, I'll get up in the morning, I'll go for a walk with the wife, and we'll take our sniffly puppy out, little Ginger, and then I'll go and have a play for 20 minutes, half an hour. I do that 2 or 3 days a week.
Do you have a drum set?
Yeah, I have. I've got my Book of Souls kit in the studio here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It was quite nice of Sonar to let me keep it, because they did want it back when I left to go with a British drum company. And then they said, look, you know, there's nothing we can do with it, so you might as well keep it. So I've got that in the studio. I did have the Dance of Death drum set in there, and I put that in storage, and I got robbed.
Really?
I got robbed. So the guy and his wife, there was this guy and his missus stole a Sonar vintage cherry red vintage kit. They stole my Premier Signia kit. They stole my Camco generic 26-inch 20 by 24 black kit. They stole all my pasty cymbals from the Dance of Death tour. They stole the bass drum, the floor tom-tom, and the gong.
Wow,
so
that's a nightmare.
So any of you guys out in South America down there, keep an eye out. Right? And if you find it, boys and girls, let Aquiles know.
Yeah.
This was a while ago. So, so I have that. I've got a Sonar Performer 5-piece in the studio, but it's not set up at the moment. My son's got his DW. I think it's called the what's it called? It's the diamond kit or so. I forget the name of it. It's like got the playing cards on it. You know, spades, diamonds, hearts, and clubs. Silver drum set, beautiful kit. And so I've got the Dance of Death. So I'd go in there, and that's because it's the same setup as the Legacy kit.
Okay.
As all my drums have been the same footprint. The only thing that's changed is the different cymbals. Whether I'm using 2002s, signatures. I used dimensions at one time. So whatever was current with the pipe, with the brand is what I was using. So that's the only thing that changed. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what was happening in your life before you joined Iron Maiden, and when you joined the band? Did your financial situation change immediately?
Well, okay. Before I joined Maiden, I was blessed to play with a lot of different great players and make a living still in between gigs. I played with Streetwalkers, did 2 albums with them in the 70s, 75, 74, 75. I joined Pat Travers in 76, did 2 records with him. After that, I joined a band for a singer called Jenny Darren, did an album with her. Then there was a bunch of sessions. I used to do sessions before Streetwalkers for a couple of years. I made my money. And I don't sight read. So it was, I'd hear a song once and I could play it. Now it's a bit different now. I struggle sometimes with these weird time changes that Steve throws at me. And he gets really frustrated. Why can't you play that? It's simple. I said, yeah, well, you know it's simple because you wrote it. Give me a minute. the key that opens the door for the change. Anyway, then I worked with a guy called McKitty. It was a 3-piece rock band after Pat. And after playing with, in fact, Donovan McKitty, the band, his name was Donovan McKitty. Charlie Tumahai was the bass player. He used to play with Bebop Deluxe. There was a power trio. So I come out of Pat's band, which is a power trio, into this band, McKitty. And we actually were on the same bill as Iron Maiden's very first gig out of England. So they'd only been playing from when their professional career, when Killers was recorded, and Iron Maiden, sorry, they had only played in around London and England. And this was their very first show. It was in Belgium, and I was on the same bill with them. That's hence how I got the gig with Maiden, because the guitar player's guitar amp blew up, and he was farting around trying to get some. We didn't carry spares and everything in those days, So me and Charlie were playing in the song, and instead of stopping, we did an impromptu solo each. So I did this drum solo. Steve was standing on the side of the stage, as he pretty much does at every band that supports Maiden from day one since I joined. He'd always stand on the side of the stage, whether it's his daughter or his son playing in the band, didn't matter. and he saw this drum solo and bass solo, and he remembered it. So when Clive wasn't doing so well, and he was thinking, well, we might have to replace him, I was the first guy they thought of.
Okay.
Anyway, so there was McKitty. Then I went with Trust for 2 years, did a record with them. They're a French outfit out of Paris, and I actually played on the Killers tour when Paul Di'Anno was in the band. I think Adrian had just joined, or was it? I can't remember. A bit vague on that one. And
yeah, you were filling in, right? Just for
no. Trust supported Iron Maiden. We did like 28, 29 shows in England on the Killers tour, opening up for Maiden. So then I got a chance to, really get to know the guys and hang out with them. And then they supported Trust in 1982 when they had a Number of the Beast tour going, and Bruce was in the band. And they did a bunch of opening up for Trust in France. So our paths had crossed, and it seemed like the stars aligned, and eventually I ended up getting the drum seat. So then when I joined Maiden, I was just on a salary. So yes, it did financially change, but not to a great degree. But I had a monthly paycheck coming out of Maiden, and as it progressed, and I started to really find my comfort zone within the band, and everyone was happy with this crazy lunatic drummer, then things started to get better for me financially. It wasn't a big, let's put it this way. I was able to go out and get a mortgage on a house. When I first joined the band, I bought a little house in London, and I still have it, So yeah, my fortune had to definitely change, but it wasn't like, oh my gosh, I've got thousands
immediately.
Yeah.
So, but I read somewhere that you played a few shows with Iron Maiden before you joined the band to replace Clive, but you are wearing Eddie's mask. Is it true?
Well, it's funny. Yes, this is. It wasn't. Oh, look. I've got to mention this. Haven't we changed our culture since COVID? Like, if I'm in your restaurant and I did that, you're like, oh, and sneezing. I can fart now in company.
Yeah, exactly.
Fast wind and people go, that's all right.
No problem.
Before, if you're in company and you cut one out, people were like, you are having a laugh. Now it's the opposite way round. You can have a sneeze and a cough and people freak out. Anyway, as a sidebar, no. So I did. When we were supporting Maiden on when Maiden came out with Trust, right? I'd go on stage as dressed as one of the devils for Number of the Beast, and I'd get power can. You remember the lights, the old power cans that you'd have on stage, and myself and Rod or whoever, one of the road crew, there were 3 or 4 of us would have this devil's mask on. Which is in the it's on the album, the skinny devil with the red horns and whatnot. So we'd go out and shine the light on the audience, in Number of the Beast. So I'd go out and do that. I didn't actually play the drums for them. But I did do a Belgian television show because Clive got sick, and Rod called me up and said, "Look, could you come out for a day? Could we hire you for the day to come out and do this? But you've got to wear a mask." I had the Eddie, not the devil, but an Eddie mask on, the old biggest Eddie. And it was, believe me, to do that, to work in a studio. I think we did like 3 or 4 songs, Killers, Rothschild, and one other. Actually, 3 songs for the telly. It was really. I mean, it was stifling. I could hardly breathe.
I can't imagine.
I'm playing as though I'm playing for live, but it was mine to backtrack. But I mean, you still had to sort of give it some. It was terrible in this thing. So I didn't actually play like a show for them.
There was just a few songs, but you played on Clive's kit.
No, they rented a drum set. I can't remember what kit it was. It was they didn't take, they didn't take a bunch of their own equipment over. It was just,
There was a kind of top
television show.
There was a kind of top of top, something like that.
Yeah. I think there's some YouTube footage of it somewhere.
So
sure of it.
Okay, so Nico, when you joined the band to replace Clive, did you feel any resistance from the audience due the how you play and how the sounds of your drum sounds totally different from Clive?
No, I mean, when I first joined the band, and Steve said, you obviously the first thing I did was an album. I didn't go out and tour.
Okay.
So I wasn't playing all the older stuff that Clive had performed on. So we went to the studio on Peace of Mind, and then when we put the show together, and we were talking about what songs we were going to take off for the previous 3 albums, Steve said to me, he said, "Look," he said, because I said, do you want me to play exactly what Clive played? He said, "No." He said, "I want you to play the arrangement, but I want you to do it your way."
Cool.
So if you listen to classic example, Run to the Hills is, the intro I played different to what Clive played it dead straight. Back, with a lift on the hat. I still play that, but I put a there's this little, a number of the beast. I've played it pretty much the same as I do now, and I play it quite differently to Clive. I still keep the same kind of a vibe going within the verse, and then the solos kick out differently. I've got different bass drum parts in there that would just embellish it. It doesn't really change the feel of the track. So that was the nice thing. I had that artistic license, if you like, from Steve. The blessing was to play how I would have played it, but stick to the arrangement. Not being the massive, crazy drum fills. And so the sound of my drum set, Steve always loved the concert tom, which was the first kit. When I saw me with McKitty, I had the silver Sonophonic concert rack, no bottom heads, and he still say to me today, "Ooh, when are you going to bring back that single-headed drum set, Nick?" I got so used to now having because that was my preferred sound when I was with Pat when I first got that drum set. So yeah, it didn't affect sonically the band were like, "Oh, that's a different sound," or "I'm not used to that," So yeah, it was okay. There wasn't any question about that.
Okay, cool. So Gilson, we are going to skip the question 4 because he just answered that one too. Okay. How did you come up with that intro idea of Where Eagles Dare? Was your idea or Steve's idea?
It was. Well, thank you. Sorry, boy. It's good. It won't go down the internet. Well, it's funny because Bruce thinks that he came up with it, but
Bruce.
Yeah, he didn't. He just mumbled a few ideas. So what happened was, right, Steve, when we got into the rehearsal in the Channel Islands, we started rehearsal. And Steve he was upstairs writing because they were writing as we were going, if you like. So he had half of Where Eagles Dare written, and we wrote the rest of it in the studio. But he had the intro, and the first sort of segue into those quarter note. Anyway, actually 8 them. Probably 16, so yeah. So anyway, as we were going through the rehearsal, we didn't really do a lot of work. Actually, we were drinking more than actually working.
Than playing.
This one day he came down and said, "I've got this." I said, "Come on, what's this song you've been working on?" He said, "Well, it's an epic." I went, "Okay, typical Steve Harris track then." I said, "Can I have a listen to what you're going?" And he got the bass and he started. Oh, so now that sounds really like what the guitar player's going. What are you going to be playing? So that's what I'm going to be playing. Oh. Okay, all right. So it's all triplet. What 4 you can do? So
it's tough to play this with just one.
It's
just one pedal.
Oh tell me God. About it.
Oh my God.
Crying out that. Anyway, so he said, now you know what the rhythm of the verses are. I want a big F off on an expletive, F off drum fill. I said, I can do that. He says, just work something out. Call me when you're done. So I started off on the 6-inch and went something like this. Something like that. Starting on the 6, going down about 8 bars of fill. No, actually. So I've called him down, and I said to him, "Here's the drum fill," and he stood in front of the bass drum like this. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And he's gone, nah. Why? It's just too long. It's too big. I said, you said you wanted an F off drum fill to lead the song in. He said, yeah, not that big. Sort something out. I'll be back down. Give me a shout. Anyway, we got the drum fill sorted out, which was, babbly-doodly, But from me doing the next shorter version, and he said, no, that's still not right. And I said, well, what do you want? I mean, I'd already worked out the that with the ride. And that's my bass and snare. So we knew what that rhythm was, but he wanted this fill. So he's gone, I really want to play it. I've got this thing in my head. So I said, we're all right, sit on the drum set. And he started to play, but he can't really play. He loves to, he wanted to be a drummer before a bass player, funny enough. So he's trying, and I ended up giving him a drum lesson. And then finally, he couldn't get it. And we had a right laugh while we were trying to I was teaching him how to play. He turned around, he went, happily babbly, happily babbly, happily babbly, something like that. And I went, oh, you mean this? Babbly-go-doodly, 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 bat. And then Bruce actually turns around and said he came up with the idea because he came in. I do remember him coming in, but we weren't really paying much attention to him.
That's a cool story.
It really was a collaboration. I mean, I can't put my hand up and say that was all me. He turned around and went like hoobly hoobly bab. It's like our drum tool. Like people do spats, spats, spats.
Cool.
Hoobly bubbly. Anyway, so yeah, that was it. So really, it was a collaboration. All right, we'll throw Bruce in the mix. He had to go and all. So it's a 3-way split. What's three ways of nothing?
Nothing, yeah.
Right, exactly.
Nico, Dom Famularo is here on the chat saying hello to you.
Oh my gosh.
Who's that?
Dom Famularo.
Oh, Dom. Hey, Dom, how you doing, mate? Love you.
Okay.
I didn't get an invite to do your show, by the way, Dom. What's all that about?
I will. Actually, we have a show tomorrow for Mapex at the Mapex Facebook. Yeah, tomorrow. Okay, Nico.
I shouldn't have done that. Listen, Mapex make really beautiful drums. Your drum set is absolutely stunning, by the way.
Thank you.
I love the heads you're using. Are they are Evans heads, right?
Yes, Evans.
Yeah. Your kit sounds fantastic. I mean, Mapex, I would say that a number of years ago, we're talking about 30 years plus, probably, when they first came out, they had a bit of a struggle getting a good shell, but they're making a great set. So you're doing a thing with Mapex tomorrow?
Yeah, exactly. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. East time on Mapex Facebook. Yeah. Domstomp. Yeah.
Oh, I might have to pop into that. So Facebook, right?
Yeah, Facebook.
Okay, I'll be on the the comment buttons.
Okay, Nico, how important is Steve Harris' opinion when you are about to record the final track of your drums?
Well, here's the thing. What we usually do when we're all learning somebody's song. Most of the time, Steve he's the prolific writer in the band. But on the last couple of 3 albums, there's been collaborations from Bruce, all the guys, Yannick primarily, and Adrian. So what we do, we'll sit down acoustically in a circle, and I'll either get a pair of bundle sticks and just sit
just like that,
just on my legs, or and then the trouble is, after a while your legs get a bit sore, so I end up
I can imagine
and just using my hands like I did just then. So
you used to do this in the 80s as well?
No, in the 80s it was slightly different. We the difference today to then was you had analog tape.
Okay.
We didn't have digital, numbers and dots and dashes and all that going on. So what we would do, you'd learn that we still do that today, in a modern day with digitized music. But the last album, the Book of Souls album, was done in, we like, let's say, for instance, Empire of the Clouds. We had to do that in sections. So that's what gives you the great opportunity, is you can cut and paste stuff.
Okay, yeah.
You compile a track out of 3 or 4 different songs at different takes. Whereas in the old days, you really had one and done. And if you wanted to overdub something, it was a little bit more difficult because you had to splice tape. And if, say, for instance, in a drum track, there was a bass drum missing, you could go and do, lay that in. If there was something that was out of time slightly, you wouldn't go and you'd have to record on another machine and cut that bar out or whatever. You could do it, but it was time consuming. So your idea was you wanted to go from A to B. So you rehearse it in a rehearsal room and do it as though you're playing live. Then you go and transfer that to the studio, much like we did with Peace of Mind. Although we only went in with 5 songs written, so the rest of the songs were learned in the studio. Brave New World was done that way. We actually rehearsed it in the studio. Book of Souls was done that way. Matter of Life and Death, pretty much the same. So
but then you learn one song and you record, or you learn them all.
Well, when you're doing the writing rehearsals, you learn that song, put it to bed, and then learn the next song. So the nice thing is, the first song you learn is usually played more with familiarity, because you've learned the song, you've lived with it for like 2 weeks, 10 days, because that's the first song. So you're hearing it every day. So the last song that's written is the one that's had the least amount of rehearsal time to it, if you like, and run throughs. But today's way, or when we did Book of Souls, we the last few albums was we learned the songs in the studio. We've been blessed to be able to afford to use the same room, set it up ready to record, but do 3 or 4 weeks of writing rehearsal, and then Kevin would come in. It's all put some mics up on a weekend. We go back in. But while we were learning the songs in that way, we would do them acoustically. And then when we've got the song written and I've got basically my rhythms together, I'll sit just me and Steve. We'll just play together. And sometimes he might say, I don't feel like that should be double time, that what you're playing there. Can you do it in half? So we work that particular sketch, if you like, of that part of the song together. And then once we put that to bed, we record it on our iPhones, and he'd insist that I recorded it, so I didn't change it.
That's cool. That's really cool.
So that's pretty much how the drum parts are made. So when we're getting ready, when we record the track, yes, there's a lot of ad-lib stuff goes on. Not around the arrangement, but within certain throwing little accents in. I tend to like to hear what Bruce is singing. I might phrase something with him, or a particular lick that the guitar plays. I'm not just keeping time with Steve and grooving. That's where I bounce my style of playing off of. So when we're in the studio, one of the guitar players might throw a lick in, and I'll go, "Whoa, that's a nice groove," and I'll play it the next refrain, But so what happens then is, once we've done the track, we all sit in the studio and critique each other's playing.
Okay. So basically, so My question, since you guys changed a little bit the process of recording, my question is much more about the 80s now. When you were going to record the songs from the 80s records, did everyone already have their parts ready, even Bruce Dixon? Or was the final version of the songs getting shaped while the band was recording the final parts?
That's a good question. Certainly some songs, yeah. You know, the old days, the way we used to record was I had to get the drum part right first. And then Steve would go in and take his bass strings off, put new bass strings on, and overdub the bass again. That was the first 2 or 3 albums that we played together in the 80s. That's how it used to be. So the rhythm parts, there would be the guys, Dave and H, would learn their rhythm parts within the writing of the song. Bruce in the meantime is writing out lyrics unless Steve got the lyrics. So Bruce would sing a scratch vocal. Right? If it was a song that Bruce has worked on with us in terms of, you know, the lyrics are done and he's got these melodies together, Steve is very, very, very particular about how phrasing, if he's written the lyrics, how Bruce needs to phrase those lyrics. Well, what we would do 9 times out of 10, we'd have that as a scratch vocal track, and Bruce would then do it again and work. Steve would work with him and go, "No, you're coming in like a quarter beat too soon. I want, you know, take a breath. This, that, and the other." But 90% of the track that was a scratch track was usable.
Okay.
You know,
because
most of
what is funny, what is funny that I can feel that sometimes maybe you record a track and the guitar players or Bruce, they like the accent, you know, the accent of the drums, and they go together. So, you know, it's perfect match in that part. That's why I'm asking.
A lot of that was, it's the spontaneity of the band. You know, in the early days that we had a lot of that. But, you know, for instance, solos, you know, when you were playing a song and you get to verse, chorus, bridge, you know, segue into a solo section, the guys would wing a solo, right? They'd be just flying. And again, you know, 90% of the solos, you know, probably a good 80% of the solos that either Dave or Adrian played, they'd use. You know, or Adrian would do a solo, and I remember a couple of times he was like, "Oh, it's not the tone I want." Adrian is more, out of the 2 or 3 guitar players out, he's more finicky about how his guitar sounds for a particular solo. And they're all very much that way, but Adrian is more on the top of that. He's more the icing on the cake, you know, when it comes to his sound. So he would go, "I want to get a different sound, but I'll do that solo again." But the problem is, because it was ad-libbed, it's very hard to recreate that particular spur of the moment solo. You know, it's like a demo track. When people go and bands going to do a demo, and you go to the studio and you go, "What, we've got to stop. Well, let's record it. Let's just whack the tape on." And you play it, and it's like a 4-track, or it's one of these cell phones, and whatever. And it has this incredible energy and vibe to it. And then you go into a professional studio, as we call it, you all know what you're doing, and you play it, and you go, that first tape we played in the rehearsal, that's like got something. What can't we get there? We're not making any mistakes. The drum parts, you know, but we call that the X factor.
The moment,
it hasn't got what we call, excuse me, girls, I'm not being, you know, feminist or whatever you want, ain't got the swinging tip feel.
Perfect.
You know, anyway, I'm not being rude. It's what we can.
No, of course not. No.
Right. So, yeah, you know, the older ways I wanted to do. Dance of Death was that. We did that in the studio. We wanted to play it all live, and Bruce was pretty much singing everything, and a lot of that album was actually used from the one and done tape, or 2 or 3 tapes, you know. So
amazing.
We've always tried to capture the live essence of Maiden, and it's very, very difficult in a sterile studio situation. You haven't got an audience, you haven't got that vibe, you haven't got a large space to run around in. You know, a studio is very constricting in that terms of space for each person. You know.
Okay. So everyone knows that the World Celebrity Tour was one of the longest in the history of the metal at that time. Did you also think you might go crazy at some point, or was it just Bruce Dickinson who was most tired? And have you ever thought about leaving the band at that time?
No, absolutely not. Actually, the only time I was going to leave Iron Maiden, and I actually packed my suitcase. We were staying at the Park and Meridian Hotel in New York. I packed my suitcases, went down to the lobby, and was ready to leave, which was after the Allentown show on the Power Slave tour.
Okay.
Sorry, no, it wasn't the Power Slave tour. It was at the on the Peace of Mind tour. So I'd only been in the band like 9 months or so, which was still. This may have something to do with the road crazy shit, right?
Okay.
Excuse me swearing. So what happened was there was a big thing that went down on Allentown, and Bruce eventually, we all know the story. It's called Mission for Mary. Bruce came in.
Yeah, amazing.
He was
that
recording it he had a cassette Walkman in his back, bigger than this phone. And he went, whoa, yeah. Nick, what do you think would happen if somebody said the lighting truss was about to fall on your head? And then it started up, and me and Harry started arguing together with Bruce. And then finally, so the very end of the Mission for Mary, Steve discovers that Bruce is recording it. So goes, I won't say the word, but you know what he said. Someone's recording this. And I went, what? So Harry's bear hugged Bruce. I've grabbed the cassette out the back of his pocket. And the machine. And I've opened the machine and I said, I said, is there anything on this? And he went, no. And I threw it on the floor. And I had what were called beetle boots on, which was kind of about 1.5 inch platform heel. So I missed the cassette and it kind of flicked under the heel, right? And I went, oh, bollocks. And because I was going to smash it. We didn't want anybody to hear this argument that he'd stirred up.
Yeah, especially at that moment.
He hit me. He didn't hit me in the face, thank God. You wouldn't have thought so, would you? Anyway, he whacked me in the tummy. And Harry went, my God. No. And I ended up running. He left the dressing room. We were in porter cabins. You know how long those porter cabins are, right? So it was Allentown Fairgrounds. He's gone and sat down on the couch. I've come out and I thought, that's it. I said to Steve, no one hits anyone in a band. I'm fucking off. Excuse me. I'm off. So I legged it and I was going to physically fight with Bruce and leave. I was done. So he went, sorry. He put his hands up and I'm like, oh, he's got the cassette. He says, I forgot. I've got some lyrics to a song called Power Slave on this tape. And so it was like something out of a cartoon. You know, when Tom and Jerry and, you know, there's a big fist in front of Tom and he's, you know, it was like that.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah. And there was one other time in New York, I got told off from my manager for wearing a suit.
Wow.
And that was the Park and Meridian. I was getting ready to leave. And Merck Mercuriades, who worked for the band on the management, saw me in the reception checking out. He said, what are you doing? So I'm going home. I've had enough. I said, you know, I'm not going to be treated like that. If I want to wear a suit when I go out, you know, and it was a beautiful maroon 3-piece suit, you know. In fact, Dave Coverdale saw me wearing it and he said, yeah, nice suit, Nick. Where'd you get that from? It was endorsed by David. So, hey, hang on, is that cool or what? So, anyway, yeah, that was the only 2 times. But, you know, the thing for me was that the Peace of Mind tour, there was like 4 or 5 shows in a freaking row. And, you know, when you're 30 years old, you know, you're playing the music you love to play. Mm-hmm. You can play, you know, through illness, through, you know, the show must go on, you know, that your professional head comes on and you get on with it. I must admit, by the end of that tour, though, we were all burnt out. and more none so than Bruce. Bruce was really ready to jack the tail in, you know, because the thing is, it's different. You know, his instrument is his voice, and he was doing 4 or 5 shows in a row, a day off, 3 gigs in a row, 2 days off, 5 gigs in a row, day off. You know, and it was for 13 months. And there was travel days thrown in when we were going to different countries, and then you get off the plane, and the next day you're up on stage and doing 3 or 4 in a row. So it was really tough. Also really difficult for Bruce. I mean, we were all very fit then. You know, they are now more so than I am, because of the COVID weights come back on and all that. You know, so I didn't really get to the stage ever on the tours where I wanted to, you know, say, I'm going to throw it in, I can't do this. Now, the last Legacy tour we did last year, Rod asked me before they booked that tour out if I was all right doing 2 shows on, day off, 3 shows, well, you know, very rarely we do 3 now, but because physically to drive Maiden, for me now, being I'm the granddad of the band, it's a lot harder for my body to recover after the show. Whereas, you know, I prefer, for instance, do the gig, go to the hotel, not have to get up the next day to do a travel day, and then have a day off. I prefer to have a full day, right, like after the show, then the next day travel to the gig, do the gig, and then travel to the next city after the gig. So then I've got that next day and the day of the show to recuperate. Because, hey, Achilles, you know what it's like, and all you drummers and guitar players and people that play live music for 2 hours, when you come off stage, you've got so much adrenaline pumping through your body, and you go, you know, you're going to meet your fans afterwards, or you go back to the hotel and you sit at the bar. How many times do we go to bed before 2:30, 3 in the morning?
Yeah, exactly. Because
not because we're
adrenaline
sitting in the bar. You know, maybe you sit. I mean, I haven't had a drink in over 5 years, so I go to the bar and I just enjoy company. So you know, but you're not partying to stay up late. Your energy and your body's starting to come down, and I'll go to bed and I'll probably go to sleep around 4. Yeah. Right. So you need your rest, and I need that extra little bit of relaxation. I could not do a 13-month tour. No way could I do 5 shows in a row now. Not with me.
Because after show the adrenaline's still there.
Yeah.
You know? It takes some time to. Wow.
It's very important, you know, at any age to make sure you get enough rest.
Oh yeah.
I know I'm not going to be preaching, but I'm going to say don't do drugs. Have a drink now and then. You know, if you're going to have a puff, have a puff. Anything else, you don't sound any better. You kid yourself. Oh, I had a great gig last night. Yeah, right. Okay. Look after yourself. Here's the thing. Good night's rest. Try and get 8 hours, kid. If that means going to bed at 4 in the morning, then you get up at 4. You know, that afternoon or 2 o'clock, you know, you've got a good sleep. Always have a good breakfast and one square meal if you can. Now, for me, I can't eat 3 hours before I go on stage. I can eat I can eat a lot before I go 3 hours. When I'm playing, whatever I've eaten 3 hours or 2 hours prior to the gig, it doesn't like me, you know. So stay healthy. You know, and go for walks in the afternoon on days off. That's what I think you need to do, you know, keep it all going.
Yeah, I can tell, like, to play the songs that I record 15 years ago is totally different nowadays, you know. And I'm just getting closer to the 50s, you know. I can imagine for you how hard it is to keep the stamina to play the songs. And let me tell you something, Nico. I saw you guys in 2016 and also in 2018. The band is sounding amazing.
Yes,
it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Like, you guys are getting better and better. You know, when those classic bands they are playing nowadays, they are using a lot of computers, Pro Tools, but you guys are real ones and you're still playing better. It's just unbelievable. Yeah,
even the stage, right? Even the stage have all that thing, the plane and all the things.
Oh my God!
The real things,
don't get me on the Spitfire. Oh Lord. We did a show that first part of the tour. I forget where we were, and it was a low ceiling, and I literally it came over the top of the drum set and it dropped down because it was really low. And I could stand up and actually touch the towel and push it. It was that close. I don't know how the crew got the whole thing in there. You know, it was bizarre. Forget where we were, but you know, yeah. The thing is, look, you know, when you have a passion and a drive for learning an instrument and playing with other guys, and you find that magic band, that you know, the unit of guys that all think and basically eat, live, and the same thing. You find this passion, and I know it's not cliche either. It really is a thing. That you have a passion to play. It's like, my analogy is, I love each and every one of my band so much. I mean, not as cool. I love my wife, but you know, bunch of fellas. But the sex is the music. And people go, is he on about the sexes? You know, I mean, none of us are, you know, play outside or bat for the other team. But, you know, there's the analogy is there's a love affair. And a love affair with your band is so important. I mean, there are people that go out and learn their trade and become session players. And they're fantastic. Or there's somebody like Vinnie Colaiuta, for instance. I mean, you know, you can piddle on a wall and he'll play it. You know, he's such an amazing sight reader. But so he gets a lot of work like that. Joan Robertson, you know, but, you know, Vinny's been really locked in with Jeff Beck for quite a while now. So there's that bond. You know, I am fortunate to have had nearly 40 years, 38 now, with the same band, a bunch of guys. Okay, so we lost one and then we gained two.
Yeah.
No, but it's the passion and the drive. You know, people go, well, aren't you going to retire? Well, when I can't physically drive the band anymore, then it would be time for me to say, let's hand it over to someone who can. And then it's down to the rest of the guys in the band whether they want to do that or not. You know. Sure.
But I think Iron Maiden without you is not possible.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's not possible.
There's three things that you've got to remember, you drummer aficionados out there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
One more thing.
No, let me finish.
Okay.
Drummer, first of all, I'm not going to put this in order of, yes, the first one is the drummer always does it with rhythm.
Okay.
All right. What was the second one? Oh, no. Oh, yes. The second one is the drummer's always the best looking bloke in the band. Without a doubt.
I agree.
Without a doubt. And the third thing is, and this is the most important one out of the three of the code, NICKO's code of drumming excellence, is the drummer is always right.
Absolutely.
Yes.
100%.
Absolutely. I don't care what anybody else says. The drummer is always right. Sorry, you had a question for me. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, so because I always joke with people that if you have two guitar players, a singer, a keyboard player, and a bass player, they can all stop, like to fix that or to tuning, whatever. But if the drummer stop, you don't have the music. You have to stop the show, right?
No, that's very true, and that's you know, your point is exactly what I said about when I was with McKitty when his amp blew up. While they were sorting out, I think actually one of the road crew for Maiden put another, you know, Marshall 100 watt or 50 watt head up for him. While they were doing that, we did an impromptu solo. Now, of course, we had the bass player. So, but what you're saying, I mean, you don't stop the song and then do a solo. We just carried on and then went into this jam.
Absolutely.
Now, there was a time where we were in South America somewhere and the PA went off. I think it might have actually been in Chile. And the power got there was a main cable that, you know, massive big plug, and somebody kicked it when it came apart, apparently. Oh, whatever. So everything went off, right? Except the PA. So I'm playing, and I actually stopped. So they're farting around, trying to get this power back on, and then the football turns up on stage, and the guys are playing soccer. And then finally Bruce turned around and went, "Oh, I know. How about a drum solo?" And I'm like, "Oh God!" You still had the PA working. This is the weird thing. The PA was working, but the back line went off. Right? So anyway, I did this like 2.5 minute solo. But you're right. You know, this is the thing about electronic drums. What happens if the power cut goes out?
Yeah.
You know, then you haven't got the drummer to just carry on while things are being sorted out.
Exactly.
And you can stand up, and then all the girls can see you. See, you've got a big kit, but you sit pretty high. You know, me, I'm down here. You know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, huge toms. So, Nicko, since you guys are very friends, do you also have those kind of WhatsApp groups where you people talk every day or send some jokes, this kind of stuff, like regular bands?
No, not really. No, I mean, we don't really talk a lot to each other. No, I speak to Steve probably once every couple of months. I'll either text him, call him. Dave Murray, Bruce's. You know, he lost. Unfortunately, he lost Paddy, his wife, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. No, 4 weeks ago. So he's been very, you know, having to deal with all that with the family. So I've left him alone. I text Yannick and Davey, but you know, and I speak to Rod and Andy pretty much once every 2 or 3 weeks, just to say hello and or you know, how you doing? How's everything going up there? You know, and Rod, my manager, was actually stranded in I'm not sure if it was Marbella, but he was out in Spain when all this COVID hit and all the travel. Nobody's going anywhere. I think he got back to England about 3 weeks ago. So yeah, we let's put it this way: we don't live out of each other's pockets when we're not working, but when we're on, when we're working, you know, we'll have me, Adrian, and Davey have got like a dinner club going on, where we'll go out for dinners, and Adrian's wife's on the road, and my wife Rebecca come out, and we go out for dinner. Yannick, if we fancy a drink after dinner, we'll find an Irish pub, and 9 times out of 10 he's holding court in some Irish pub or the other. We'll buy a pint of Guinness and send it over to him. But yeah, you know, we have this relationship where you know, now we're not going to see each other until June or May next year, right? Unless the travel sort of eases. I mean, Steve's in England right now. He just left 2 weeks ago to go back to England. You know, I'm wanting to get over to see my family. So maybe before December, I'll get over there. So it's a bit difficult, you know, when you everybody's living in different parts of the world. But we'll keep in touch with one another, but not every week.
Okay, cool. So the next question, it's for you, Gilson. Go ahead.
Yay! Before my question, I have to say something. Some of the audience here in Brazil are complaining they're not understanding because they don't speak English. So if you guys let me, I would like to say then a message here in Portuguese, telling them that after the show, me, Aquiles, will be probably here staying a while.
Yeah, exactly.
And talking then in Portuguese and translating the highlights.
Yeah, cool.
So,
sure. Now go ahead.
Go ahead.
Ok, pessoal, a gente vai permanecer aqui no final da live, tá? O pessoal que não está entendendo as respostas, eu e o Aquiles estaremos aqui no final, conversando sobre os pontos principais, as respostas principais.
A gente tem as
então,
perguntas aqui, né?
Então não desanimem aí, tá? Enquanto isso, façam um cursinho de inglês. E é isso aí, voltamos à programação.
Sorry for that, Nicko, sorry.
Not at all. It's good that you could do that for let the kids know what's going on.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, everybody right now, because we have no live music, there's no sessions going on.
Yeah.
There may be 1 or 2 with social distancing required and whatnot, but you know, we need to take care of one another. You know, how we do that, we can donate money, and hopefully, you know, it goes to the right people.
Yeah, people are helping a lot here.
Yeah,
donating
you know,
a lot.
it's important. You know, it's. I know that Rod has been very high profile with charities back in England, and with his, you know, the truants and stuff like that, which we all support very much. But there's a lot of players that just have hit hard times, as well as a lot of other people. It's not just the musicians, but this is our world. This is our world. This is our livelihoods. It's going out, putting smiles on people's faces, going out to doing concerts, being able to have close contact. We've got to get over this pandemic, because human beings, I don't know about, I'm a hugger. I meet my friends, I'll give them a hug. Sometimes I'll give them a kiss, not on the lips and with no tongue. That's me. So that's the way, and that's what people want at concerts. They want this to be a bunch of people like-minded, enjoying themselves, having a great time. But we need to make sure that we can help people that are less fortunate than ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we are doing here. Go ahead, Gilson.
My question is, what are the memories of the first Rock in Rio 1985? Is this show still Iron Maiden's biggest audience? It was like 300,000 people.
300,000
You also
people.
have
first of all, it wasn't an Iron Maiden gig. It was Queen. Let's just set that aside, because no, I'm not paying any disrespect to the amount of people that were there. But we were there as special guests of Queen. So it was really their gig. They had the 300,000 kids there, right? That 1985, oh my sweet Lord. I remember.
Nico, did you also have monitoring problems?
Yes, I didn't. Bruce did. I think Bruce slung the guitar.
I remember that part.
I forget what song it was we were doing, and he played a guitar on it, and Revelations, that's right. Yeah. And he got the thing. He went over and he threw it at the monitor guy. And I think Yeah.
Dun.
Oh my gosh.
But my main memory was, yes, of course, there were 300,000 kids there. That was immense. And I will never forget that Dave and I actually, when Queen played after our show, we actually got permission from whomever. I really have a bit of a vague block about how we did it, but we ended up going up in the lighting truss and sitting on this walkway, looking down, watching the band play. It was immense. They didn't take the stage until something like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. And we were all there from probably 12 o'clock that afternoon, or that lunchtime the day before. It was an incredible in and out. We flew down from New York. We were still on the Power Slave tour. We flew from New York first class on Varig. Now, any of us had flown first class before. The promoter, bless his heart, paid for us to get down there. And I'll never forget sitting on the plane, and this bloke came up and he said, "So, sir, would you like some lunch?" And I went, "Yeah, thank you very much. I could eat." I mean, he said, "I have a lobster or a steak." And he's got this flipping lobster, must have been £3 of lobster, hanging over the side of the plate and over the trolley. And I'm like, "Can I have the whole thing?" He went, "Yeah, you want it? You got it." That Brazilian airline, they knew how to do it. And then we did the show. I think we got in, we had a day there, and then we went to the show. I'll never forget, Cozy Powell was playing with
Whitesnake.
No, he was with Michael Schenker's band.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was with Schenker's band, and oh man, we had such a great time. But that was a big audience. Then we done it 5 times, but the next time we played there, I think we had 300,000 kids, 250,000 paid, and 50,000 blokes and girls over the fence. And that was our gig. So that was the only. I'm mentioning it because it wasn't our night. We weren't headlining, and there's a difference when you're a special guest to someone. You can't say that was your audience. But we certainly say that the second time and the other 4 times we played there. And I'll never forget standing up, looking out, and you always have this intro tape going on before the boys come out, and I stood up, got on the stage, getting myself ready, and I stood up and I leant on the cymbals. I'm in darkness, I'm not lit. And I looked out, and it was just immense because it was like a wave of heads moving, and the kids with their hands, and they're jumping up and down to the music, just the tape music. And that's when I went like, better sit down, take the weight off my feet a minute. Of course, I just cut the cake and I was sat in it. So anyway, oh look, if you didn't get that one, I certainly know
that's funny.
My drum tech got it, that's for sure. Oh, it was, I mean, my nerves were like, holy. But the thing is, in a strange Achilles, you can go to a show where it is 20, 200, 2,000, 20,000 or more fans. And I still have that same nerves before I go on. I must admit, seeing 300,000 kids,
that's amazing.
Did have an effect on me. But as soon as you have that first downbeat, that's it. It's gone. You're doing your gig. You know, can't be playing and go, God, blimey, there's 300,000 out there. I better not, mess up. Of course, what happens if you think that? You mess up.
But Nicko, since you have like special monitors, the sound of your monitoring are pretty much the same. The sound is so.
Absolutely.
What's changed for you? The ambient, or maybe the side of the hill, like.
Yeah. Listen, although I have the same setup on my left, I have these two HK monitor systems. They're driven by two 600-watt crown amps, so there's 1,200 watts of basic PA hitting me.
Yeah.
I don't change. We don't do sound checks. Our road crew, they've got a band called Dark Twat, and they do the sound check. They run like Highway to Hell's their favourite track to play. So Charlie, my drum tech, will make sure my monitors are all level wise. I have kick, snare, don't have any tom-toms. I have a kick and a snare. Steve Harris, obviously predominantly in the mid-range of the speakers, and I'll have Dave, Adrian, and Yannick split like that across my monitors, and I'll have a bit of Bruce. Because some nights Bruce will sing more powerfully than others. And I'm sure our audiences have noticed. It depends how tired he is and obviously how many shows we're into a tour. So I don't really have him poking out too much. I have sort of down in the mix a little bit. But what happens is, depending on outdoor shows, they're pretty much the same because they're outdoors. There's no ambience in the room. There's no confinement in like in acoustically in a room. It's when you play with something that's got a roof on it, like a shed. That's an outdoor show, but the sheds can make a different sound to the ambient sound on stage. So sometimes I might have to turn the level up a bit, everything. I don't kind of get into, if anything, I might have to hear Steve more. Because sometimes, depending on those particular acoustic values of the room you're playing in, it might be too rumbly out of my system with the bass. So I might take, get my monitor guy to take a bit of the low end out and put a bit more mid to top in for Steve. Steve's got a very toppy sound anyway, pretty much transferred into mine. In fact, he comes up on occasionally on my riser. He doesn't come up as much as he used to because it's so loud. Now, a speaker is not a close proximity instrument, right? Now, my speaker cabinets are 5 feet away from me. So the speaker's throwing out. So you're going to hear it if you're 10 feet in front. That's you're going to get pretty much a truer sound, like a guitar speaker or a bass speaker. So he's standing another 3 feet away from it, and he's like, "Oh, blimey, you're going to turn me down?" No, mate. He said to me once, he said, "I've got a better bass sound coming out my monitors than he had coming out front." I said, "No, you're not having my monitors." It's pretty much constant, but it does change depending on the acoustic value of the room. Like for instance, if you go to Madison Square Garden, which is kind of a boomy room, and then you go to the one in Brooklyn, I forget the name of it, Barclays Center in Brooklyn, that is a really great room sound-wise, which is why Maiden don't play the Garden anymore.
Okay.
We vetoed it, and we'll go to Brooklyn.
Okay.
Because the acoustics are really nice, and you find what it's like. You go in a room, God, blimey, my snare drum's really sounding great tonight.
Yeah.
Everything else is a bit iffy. It does tend to change. So I don't want to try and fight that. I try and play with it and not get too technical with my monitor system, because then you start having problems with if the guys turned it up too much, or maybe put the wrong EQ in for some reason. You start getting a feedback.
Okay.
And you know what that's like with your drum set and mine.
Yeah, I know.
We've got a lot of harmonics going on in our kit.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, so you know very much that Somewhere in Time is my favorite album because I start playing heavy metal with that album. So I need to put at least 2 questions about that era. Any special memories of the recordings of Somewhere in Time? And why did you only play the loneliness of the long distance runner on the first show of the Somewhere in Tour, and then you replace for another song?
Well, again, it was a Compass Point record, which was always a joy to play in the Bahamas, where we did 3 records there.
I went there just to take a picture in front of those palm trees.
Yeah. We did quite a few photo shoots.
Yeah.
It was, it was more familiar territory because we'd been there a few times previously, and so there was just an incredible vibe to that whole album. And I've got to be honest, it's my favorite artwork and my favorite Eddie out of them all. Still is today. But now, to answer your question about the loneliness, I'm not really sure why. I think we felt it didn't work live.
Okay.
Because I think you're right. We started off using it on the tour, and then it got switched out. Now, there's a couple of other songs that's happened to along Maiden's history, and the reason normally is once you've played it a few times. I mean, we did Alexander the Great on one of those tours. It only got aired maybe 2 or 3 times, and it got dropped because there was the middle section, the guitar part, that bit always had a problem with the guitar timing on it, so it was dropped. It was. I think loneliness was because it didn't seem to go down well live. Using.
Okay, and what about Alexander the Great? You never played that song live, and maybe because
we did it a few times. We actually heard it and played it live about 4 or 5 times on that tour.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we did. I'm pretty sure. I know we rehearsed it. And we always had a problem on that section, in the me, so I'm just going.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy to play.
Yeah, the guitar time. I don't know the signature in terms of the time that the guitar's playing. But the bloke who played it in the first place never got it the second time it's right.
Yeah. This happened in my band just like that. This was last year.
Oh, hang on a minute. I think I've seen a version of you guys playing that, and it was pretty good.
Exactly.
That's one truly people ask me what song would you really like to play that you haven't ever done, and that would be it. I would love to do that. I'd like to see Maiden, just off the top of my head, to do a little tour of half a dozen gigs or a dozen gigs of doing obscure songs that we've never played live.
Cool, yeah, that would be great.
Go and learn them and have fun with it. And, that obviously Alexander the Great is such a great tune. I mean, there's so many the time changes in it. It's a great track to play from the drum, as you played it so well. But that's strange. There are songs that we find that don't work live.
Okay.
And the thing is, the way Maiden's shows are, we start from number 1 song down to 18, and then Drake goes with that. That Drake goes with that one. This one's generic for 2 songs. This is a set. Now what we're doing with Legacy Beast, we've got 2 set changes. You know, we dress it war zone, cathedral, hell. You know, there's 3 different stage sets in the one show, you know. So that sort of thing happens in previous tours where we had backdrops, different line effects, Bruce coming out with flamethrowers. He gets closer to me. I've seen some YouTube videos where I'm playing and he's flipping flames like here, and it gets closer. And I pulled him up about it. I said, "What's the game?" He said, "Just going to see how close I can get." So, you know, the problem then is if you've worked the set out, when you decide to pull a different song, you've got to work, you know, it's not that easy because you've got to have the backdrop to replace.
Yeah, I know.
You see what I'm saying? And you've got to work out all the different lighting cues. So we haven't done that in a long time. But one of it was, I think, that basically because we didn't feel it went down live very well.
And how do you guys decide the set list? Is it Stevie that sends you a list and said, "Oh, we're gonna play this," or you guys discuss? Of course.
Well,
I'm not talking about the number of the bees to run to the hills.
No, those are state. Yeah, you know, you're a big fan. You've seen those. You know, you're always going to get Trooper. You're always going to get Number of the Beast.
Yeah,
Iron Maiden. Fear of the Dark, and you're going to get Iron Maiden, and you're going to get Hallowed, whether you like it or not. Now, obviously, there's a period of time on the tour, a few tours ago, where Hallowed didn't get played for a couple of years because there were some legal ramifications going on with some idiot trying to sue the band or Steve. But you know you're going to have those. So if, like, for instance, when you're doing the Book of Souls tour, you know, you've got your 10, 12 songs, whatever it is on your record, and you're going to go, what is going to be played live and what's not going to be played live? I mean, here's a classic example. Tears of a Clown was on the 2016 tour of Book of Souls. The second time we went out, we dropped it. So but we didn't drop it halfway through the tour. We did the tour, then we decided let's change it out and take that song out. Now, so what happens is we usually put our personal wish list together of songs off the new album, you know, and so then it's like discussed prior to going into the rehearsal room. And usually what will happen is Bruce, Steve, and Rod will work out set lists that we all get sent. And if you've got any major objections to a track, we air it. It's either we discuss it, and then it's a band collaboration, but primarily it's Steve, Bruce, and Rod that do the major work now. So the tour like Legacy, which is not promoting an album, it's just, you know, like another tour, you know, or you know, another live and dead one where we're not touring an album. It's free for all. We all had our choices. Mine, which was used, was Where Eagles Dare. 2 years prior to us going out in Legacy, when we were discussing how we were going to put the show together, and Bruce came up with the Spitfire. Hey, let's have a Spitfire for Ace's Eye. It was like, whoa, if we're doing Ace's Eye, let's do Where Eagles Dare. Oh, he said, that sounded, you sure you want to play that, Nick? Yeah. So, you know, that was my choice to do that, because I've always, it fits so well to the theme of what we were trying to achieve with the Warzone vibe. So we all had an input. And that's how we usually, you know, work out, you know, our favourites at the time, really. You know, why don't we do this? We ain't, like Flight of Icarus, we haven't played that in 26 years.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
You know, and it hadn't had an airing since like 1988 or something. And, you know, I don't know who it was who suggested it. I think Adrian wanted to do it. And I may be wrong, but it was like, oh, yeah, all right, let's dust the cobwebs off of that. I said, please don't play it fast. Please don't play it fast.
Yeah, but I saw, when I was visiting your drum set, I saw a metronome there.
Yeah.
Really?
So, yeah, why are you using that one?
Gilson, steady on, son. Don't get too excited.
That's a good question about the metronome.
But so, are you playing all the show with the metronome, or just a few songs?
Absolutely, you can't possibly play an Iron Maiden show to a click.
Of course.
It just doesn't work that way. So basically, what what happens for me is, over the, I went back to a revisited 1988 Made in England tour, and I could not believe the speed and how fast I was getting in songs.
What about this one? Oh my God!
Yeah, that one's different. That one was more. That was more on the backside of everything. But we were getting to a stage that as each tour was going along, where things were getting too crazy, so over the last probably 10 years, I started to, be more conscious about playing the tempos and not getting too crazy on them. Like, for instance, Hallowed, for instance, the way we play it now is probably the best tempo we've ever played that track. But in the solo section, there's 3 layers when it goes into the solo where I push it. And I'll retard it when we come back with the drum fill going into the last verse chorus. So what I do with the metronome is I'll clock every song to the best tempo, usually either it's the same tempo as we recorded it at, that we'd start the song at, like, for instance, Trooper. So that's tempo. So what happens with that is, as soon as we start, the guys tend to race it, and Bruce will push the vocals from the way back 20, 30 years ago when it was like, there's a lot that kind of got lost along the way. So what I did is I had, especially with the new stuff off of Book of Souls, like the actual title track, that I had to, I would use it as a reference. Live, it would always move up. And the thing is, the way Maiden play, there's light and shade, as you know. You push the solos, you come back on the verses. And if you haven't got a reference point, it can be a bit more challenging. I'm not saying we slow down to the clock. I'm saying it's purely there to start the songs with the count, right? And then obviously
turn it off.
Like in Book of Souls, where it breaks down, right? That section, that clock is programmed with 2 different timings. Okay. Foot switch, push, there it is. Oh,
okay.
And then it might creep up from there, but it's a reference to make sure that we start at the right speed. Okay. And not, because sometimes, your adrenaline's going. You think you're counting like the proper meter of the song, and yet you're like maybe 10 beats a minute up on it. By the time you get to the end, you look at the clock, you go, "Wow, we finished that song 2 minutes early."
Just like that.
Yeah, so that's really there for a reference. Yeah, I don't play it and look. Tears of a Clown, I played pretty much to that clock because it needed to be straight on that backfill and
Okay, so this next question is a little bit tense. Okay, you feel free to reply or not. Okay.
Okay.
So, was it my impression, or when you played the Rising Hell show, which was Bruce Dickinson's last shows at the time, were the things really tense among you guys? Did you ever have separate dressing rooms? I read that at the time you were really upset with him.
Damn right I was. Yeah, that's old history. We know that. Yes. No, I'll answer the question. It was us and him, without a doubt. I think it was 6 weeks after we finished that Fear of the Dark tour. And we had committed to do that show a year and a half or 2 years prior. It was a pay-per-view thing, and Bruce agreed that he was going to come back and play the show. It was not our finest hour, by no question about it. It was not our finest hour. Now, not just because of the us and him thing, where Bruce was kind of not really a part of the band. I think he more communicated, if you like, call it that. He had more interaction with Yannick out of the whole thing. Yeah. Because Jan was his mate. And you know, we're all mates, but you know, I think he felt more comfortable staying over with him than Steve, myself, and Dave. But yes, I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy. I didn't play that show very well. I thought it was the silliest thing we should have done because it was an embarrassment to Iron Maiden, to be honest.
I know.
So the performance, the level of performance. This is my personal opinion, right? And I'm being very candid. I think it was a big mistake because it wasn't that great. And Bruce did have his own dressing room. He had his own makeup artist as well.
Wow. Wow.
Which, you know, looking back on it, it was part of our history. You know, okay, he left the band, and you know, there was a lot. I had a real bad taste in my mouth and my psyche about the way he did that, and I wasn't happy and amused with him at all. And he knew that, and he said, if it was anyone else saying and feeling the way that you did,
yep,
I'd have hit you. You know, but when he came back to the band, we put that to bed. And I remember sitting in a bar with him. We had a meeting in Brighton at Rod's house. Adrian wasn't there, although Adrian came back to the band at the same time. We were supposed to stay overnight at the Grand Hotel in Brighton, and we had the meeting. And Dave, myself, Jan, and Bruce went, "Don't fancy staying tonight. Let's go back to London." So Dave had his own drive. Me, Bruce, and Yannick ended up driving back to Chiswick. And Bruce, let's go to my local pub. It's getting a bit late, but they'll stay open late for us. So we went in. And I remember standing at the bar with Bruce, and I put my arm around him and I said, "You know, I love you, mate." He said, "I love you too, Nick." And I said, "But I tell you what, I can't change what I felt and what I said about what happened." And he said, and he looked me in the eye, looked up at me actually. "Oh no, Nick, no." And so we made our peace and I said, and we don't. And I think he said, "Oh, we won't talk about this again," and we never had. And except for me talking to you about it now, but it's the point of our history, and it was another page of our Maiden's history. It was done.
Okay.
We had to have done that Raising Hell gig. It was, you know, it wouldn't have been the same if we hadn't. But it was very tense. It was a tense. You know, the best of it. I mean, there was no. Let's put it this way: no one was angry. And, you know, my angst that I had, I knew Bruce had left. You know, there was nothing we could do about that. But we had to go on stage and perform in front of, I think, 150, 200 kids, and do this pay-per-view live thing. And it was fun. We had Simon. What was his name? Simon Drake, that's right. Yeah. Quick little story for you. I played the only time I've ever played on New Year's Eve in my career was with Pat Travers, right, at the Marquee Club, the old Marquee Club in Wardour Street, New Year's Eve bash. Simon Drake was the magician. That was 1976.
What a coincidence.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, so we had history before. Anyway, yeah, it was tough. It was a tough cookie.
You know what is funny? When I'm watching that show nowadays, it's really strange because, you know, Bruce Dickinson is next to Steve Harris or next to Dave Murray, and they are not looking at each other at all. No,
it was it was like, you know what? The only analogy you got to say is like your girlfriend's just left you. You know,
like that, yeah.
That was it. It's like you see, it's like you meet her in the bar or something. You're like, oh gosh, you know. But you know, there was great moments though. There was some really good moments in that. But there was a lot of mistakes and a lot of devil may care. Not really, you know. I think it was a mistake. We shouldn't have done it, but we did.
Okay, but when Bruce came back, did you guys like told them something like this? Okay, but if you are coming back now, you are not leaving at all until we decide to stop the band.
No, he said that was it. You know, once back, he's back for good. And, he said that. He said that I'm not going to. You know, I'm not going to be leaving the band. You know, I'm coming back. He said, I'm fed up of playing the second division. I want to play for the Premier League.
Yeah, because it it seems that now he and Adrian, they are enjoying much more the shows.
Oh yeah, everybody is. I mean,
yeah,
that's the thing. You know, Adrian. You know, you when I see stuff on YouTube, you know, I browse in and have a look. Mainly, I look out the sound more than anything. But which 9 times out of 10 is pretty good. So, and I look at the interaction between everybody there, because I don't get to see that. You know, I can see bodies running around, you know, if I'm looking in the right place, but I don't actually see, unless I decide when I'm playing, I'm like this, head down, and I'm either looking to my left or I'm looking down and look my right, and then I think, oh, what's going on? And I sit up, and I'll have a peek over my Dom Toms and my cymbals. Yeah, I can't see Davey because my right cymbal's in the way.
Yeah, it's right there.
So it's great when you see this interaction, and when I watch videos from people that, you know, are great fans that have taken great pictures and videos out front, you get to see it, and everyone's like having so much. I mean, how they do it without, you know, whacking. I mean, you got to get paid danger money playing on the front of the stage, because Harry's out there with his bass running like this, Yannick's spinning his guitar around his noggin, and Davey's even running about now. You know, Davey used to just stand in one place and sort of lean forward and going to do the little jog. You know? And now they're all over the shop. And of course, Bruce is Bruce. He's never changed. He's just a dynamo, and he's upstairs. You know, a lot of the time he tends to be upstairs above me on the walkways because it's quite loud down the stage.
I can imagine,
especially the bass.
The bass, I went there a couple of times in the front row. I just could hear the bass.
Yeah. I mean, that's okay with me, you know.
Gilson, do you want to ask something?
I want to ask you, do you still listen to the records?
Occasionally, yeah. I've actually put Book of Souls in my car like 2 weeks ago, and I was rocking out to the Book of Souls track itself, because there's just something about that track. I really love it. It's got that kind of bit of, but tipping me out to John Bonham, you know. It's just a couple of little things in there that I felt that he went, yeah, have some of that. It's a great track. I don't really tend to go back, you know, very often, but when I do, I'll kind of have a binge listen, and I'll go, I think I'll have a listen to X Factor, and then unfortunately, sometimes when I listen to that album, I kind of have to turn it off. There's some great songs on it, but you know, it's just what mood I'm in, you know.
The next question is about this. Actually, we have one more talking about ride cymbals before. You played with a second ride cymbal until the album Fear of the Dark. Why was it necessary at that time?
Well, it's weird, because in the early days, I always had 2 rides. I had a 22 and a 20, and I'd alternate depending on what part of the song I'll be playing. I'd alternate because I use quite a lot of bell, you know, or sitting about an inch to the left of the bell or below it. Now I'm sort of a bit older. I don't tend to
not thinking anymore.
Get a bit lazy, you know. And I'd actually use the 2 rides as different colours within the texture of the you know, of the song, the fabric of it. But after I think it was around, you know, in the 90s, with Fear of the Dark, perhaps I changed, because I thought, well, I could put an extra crash cymbal over it. So what was happening, when I'd have my main ride, the 22, then the 20 here, and then I'd have an 18 or a 20 and 24 crash to the right. I mean, big old bugger, that 24. Unfortunately, the signature line, they don't have a 24. I've been asking Eric forever. Come here. So I thought, yeah, that's a bit too big, the 20-inch and 24.
Yeah.
I could take that right away and put something else in its place. And as you know, I put a 17-inch Rude there. Pretty much is my main stable cymbal for many years now. I used to have one on the left side the first cymbal on my left side, two roots, but they were both same size. But I've got a 15-inch power crash now. I don't really use it very often, but if I come up to the 6 and 8, I'll end up with that little 15 ago. So yeah, it was just something that I felt was needed, because it helped me not to, to get to this 20.
To move, yeah.
To
move
get,
that much.
Yeah, and it's easier to just kind of go there instead of
doing this. Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, one more tense question. The last one, tense.
Okay.
What can you say about the Blaze Bayley period in the band? Was he really the best choice? Did you guys even consider Michael Kiske, who was also working with Rod Smallwood at that time?
Well, at the time, he was the front runner. I mean, and listen, don't get me wrong, man. We listened to thousands of people. We had people sending in CDs and tapes and pictures and resumes and stuff. Now, as far as Michael Kiske, I don't think it was decided. We really wanted to have more of an English thing.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, and I mean, we Jeff Tate was bounded about, and it was like, well, he's an American. This is an English rock band, so there was a little bit of bias on that respect. Okay. We did 4 tours. We did 2 tours together. I mean, Blaze was, the thing here with Blaze is that there were nights when he sang his cotton socks off, and it was brilliant. And there were a lot of other nights where it wasn't so hot. But those 2 records, those tracks that we had on those, X Factor and Virtual 11, and then of course we had that amazing promotion scheme around the football teams and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
He was in his glory, So we did 2 great albums. Love him or hate him. It was what we were saying about the history of Maiden. That was part and parcel. And I don't think we could have had it any other way. But to the Michael Kiske thing, I think was primarily we wanted to keep it English. British.
Okay. Personally, I love the X Factor album.
Oh yeah,
all the songs, and especially "Sign of the Cross." That's
my
favorite.
Look,
that one is great.
Yeah, we're doing that on the Legacy tour, and that's one of my, that's another track that has to be played. You can't get too quick with it. And that certainly was fast a number of years ago. But that is a stunning track. When 2 Worlds Collide, that's another one of my favorite songs. There were some stunning tracks that were on that. Sound-wise, sonically, I think we could have probably done better, but it's still part of our history, and Blaze was a big part of that for 2 albums.
Yeah. And the vibe of that album, it's kind of dark, but it fits really well with the cover artwork, with the music and everything, and with the lyrics as well. Yeah. So, speaking about Rod, how important is Rod in your life outside Iron Maiden? Can you play with other people officially, or are you an exclusive Iron Maiden artist? And does it work the same way to the other bandmates?
Well, of course, when you have a team, there's no I in team, which is true. And we have a great management team, Rod, Andy Taylor, Dave Shacks, all that people back in London that are in furlough. Well, they're not, they're sitting at home working and whatnot. Ian Day, our tour director, they're also very important. But the question is that if I can do whatever I personally would like to do, but I always will run it by my manager, which is Rod. Awesome. And say, look, I've been asked to do this. I had a little thing last week. I spoke with John Anderson about doing a track with him. He's got this track that he's written with this guy, and they need a drummer. And so I haven't had any more information given to us. Somebody sent me a file, and there's no more information on it other than here's a WinZip file or whatever. But I said to John, look, you know, obviously I'm up for doing it. It'd be an honor and a pleasure, but I need to run it through the management. And obviously, you know, I don't know so much whether the record label situation is like it used to be, where you get courtesy of permission from MI or whatever. But it would, you know, it's still as a courtesy, I will run it by my manager. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. So in 2016, you announced your return to Sonor after almost 23 years of playing with Premier. Yep. Why, after just 4 years, you switch again to the British drum company? Does it have something about like a real sponsorship?
No.
No?
Oh, please, I wish. Could you phone up Keith Keogh and the British Drum Company and have a word? No, not at all. Okay. First and foremost, the last 5 years of my life with Premier, all my drums were built by Keith Keogh. He was the master drum builder for Premier, which is how I met him. When Premier went through this cold transition where they didn't make British drums anymore, they got rid of all the guys that were building their British drums. And Keith said, I'm going to form my own company. And I said, well, that's a nice idea. But myself, Keith Keogh, myself and Craig Buckley, who was the GM of Premier and is my partner in Drum One, we actually had a company where we were going to form this drum company together within Premier. And we had a brand that we were going to endorse through Premier. So there was a company kind of formed prior to the British Drum Company. Now, when that happened, and I knew that I had to go and find another drum company, but Keith said, well, why don't you come with me? And I said, well, the simple reason is we don't have any hardware. We don't have a hardware program with the British Drum Company. And I need that support within my drum set, not just the drums being built by this incredible builder, drum manufacturer, but the hardware has to be top form. And I need to have support around the world, which they would not have. It's taken 5 years, by the way, for the British Drum Company to now have their own Palladium casino hardware program, which is all very sweet and in place. So, okay, moving forward, I thought, well, who do I want to go with? And, I was very blessed to be able to basically take my pick to go and approach someone. So I thought, well, I've always had a soft spot for Sonor. So we sat down 6 years ago now, and 5 years ago. And we sat down around a table, my manager, Andy Taylor, myself, and we worked out a whole program of me coming back with Sonor.
Okay.
And we had my endorsement deal with them was they were going to give me my equipment, which is the same with every company, verbal agreement, although they said we have to have a contract where it's owned by us for tax purposes and da-da-da-da-da. But we were working on licensed stuff, which is what I had with Premier. Okay. I don't know if you remember, I had the Spirit of Maiden drum set. I had the replica drum set. Dance of Death kit, Matter of Life and Death kit, Give Me Head kit, all those different beautiful replicas. So we had this lovely business structure, and unfortunately, there was no, I wasn't getting paid. I never get paid to use the equipment ever. That's not what I'm in it for. I use it because I love it. Okay. And so they said, yes, we'll take you on. Unfortunately, the business side of our agreement and our arrangement fell down, and things just didn't work out. The management was they changed the distribution through Honor and much of the same stuff that led me to leave in 1992. It started the same kind of messing around, and it was a tragic. It was tragic in a way because my first drum set I ever bought was a Sonor teardrop kit when I was 16, and I've always loved the brand. And it's just been business stuff, and I thought, so then I had I was a bit despondent towards the end of the Book of Souls tour. And there was a lot of other really nasty things going on that shouldn't have been going on. And personally, I thought, well, you know, if this is how they're treating me now, how's it going to be in another 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I know.
So I spoke to Keith, and Keith, they were still on with me about this program, and I was given some advice on some of the hardware ideas that are now in place with Palladium. And I said, look, if I don't get things sorted out with with Sonor, I'm coming with you. And so that's what happened. And we sat down, BDC, myself, and some of the other directors of the company, and I bought some shares in the company. So then they said, would you be the international ambassador for us? And
that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's where we're at now. But of course, with bloody COVID, nobody's doing anything. So that's all kind of great. They're still making lots of drum kits, by the way. People are still, ordering stuff and buying. There's not the retail side. Isn't like you can still go into a music shop and buy something, but there's all the stay safe and you can't go and touch the drumsticks. You'll take your own. But yeah, so I'm very proud to be able to say I'm back with Keith, building my drum set. They built me a beautiful kit called the Icarus drum set, which was
beautiful.
Was going to be on tour now with the Legacy of the Beast tour. The only thing that changed is I didn't use a beechwood shell. I went with birch. I went with birch, a 8-ply of birch. The inside was black oak, and then a laminate finish, which was all the eddies in the stained glass. Exactly the same artwork was on my Sonor kit last year. Smoke chrome hardware.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. It's very, very similar. But when you were using Sonor, your kits were manufactured in Germany or in Taiwan?
They were in Germany.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
and we just, when Keith built in Premier, Keith built a snare drum out of sycamore wood for me called a NICKO Sicko, which was my signature snare. And when I went with Sonor, I said, look, I want my own signature snare drum. And they went, yeah, that's okay. And then we had a problem with it. This is the weirdest thing. When I moved with British Drum Company, I have 2 snare drums. I have a steel snare and a Talisman, and I have the Icarus snare, which is stunning, black oak. And on the outside, on the 10th, I think it's 10-ply on the snare drum. The inside is black oak, and the outside is fishtail oak, which is, I think it's kind of it's a process that an Italian company do. So we're, trying to get the wood at the moment. It's a bit difficult for what's going on, but it's a stunning snare drum. And I had that before they made the full drum set that we showed off at NAMM, which was the Icarus drum set, which was and instead of taking an Iron Maiden drum set, we just designed this drum set. We took the fishtail oak from the snare drum, which basically built the snare drum. It gave birth to a full 11-piece drum set, which is
cool. That's amazing. So, Gilson, I think we can skip the question 17 because So we just have 2 more, okay, Nico?
Okay, mate. I'm having fun. Hope everybody else is.
Yeah, they are. We still having a very large audience here. People are enjoying a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah. So nowadays, do you have some kind of special preparation before starting a tour? What has been more difficult in all these years playing your drum kit, which remains the same and it's very personal? I really like the way that you approach the drums, because nowadays, especially the guys that were playing in the 80s, they are like reducing all the sizes of the drum sets to make it easier to play. And you still playing the same kit. This is unbelievable. Amazing.
Well, there's a story for that. So a number of years ago, I can't remember, it must be about 6 or 7 years back, I spoke to Steve. I said, here, you know, can I go back to a 5-piece? I mean, I love playing a big kit, but there's a different approach to playing a 5-piece kit to an 8-piece or a 10 or 11-piece kit. So I said to him, I really want to play a smaller kit. I said, you know, I'm getting on a bit, you know, a bit long in the tooth. I said, you know, can I go to a smaller kit? I can still play Troubadour on 5-piece kit and all that. And he goes,
yeah.
Nah.
That kit is part of the show.
No, he goes. I said, why is that? He says, because all the girls in the audience be able to see you.
Good.
It's a true story. I'm not making this up, boys and girls.
Really? Is it a true story?
Okay.
Is it a joke?
So here's the thing. I have changed my setup slightly. From when I started Book of Souls and I got the new kit, I had problems with my lower back and compressed discs and stuff and pinch sciatic and all this bollocks. I don't want to bore you with the rest of the details, but anyway, so I decided that I needed to take the stool up higher and sit up with more of a straight back. I'm what I always refer to as a lazy drummer. So this is me sitting up straight. This is me when I play. I tend to not lean. I'm not leaning forward. I'm just lazy. My back's like that instead of like this. Sorry, straight. You know. And I thought, well, to be able to carry on, I need to lift my stool up, which I went up about 1.5 inches, and I'm going to flatten my tom-toms. Because before, over the years, the angle of my toms started to go like really acute down this angle, you know, really deep. So I went more flat now.
Okay.
So what that encouraged me to do, that the only thing is the ride stays the same. And the height of the drums are the same, but the angles are different.
Okay.
So if maybe the center's moved up maybe 1/8 of an inch, so maybe my ride cymbal's gone up, but not noticeably, so I can't still get to the bell on the, you know, the left side at 9 o'clock. But when I do a fill now, and I don't tend to use a 6 and 8 as much as I used to, I go 10, 12 and down. Is when I play on the toms now, I actually have to be sitting up because otherwise I'll hit the rim and not the drum.
Okay.
So it's encouraged me to have a better posture, or better late than never, they say, right?
That's cool.
Now I have changed the angle. Now, if you'll notice, videos from Book of Souls and Legacy compared to Matter of Life and Death and, you know, Somewhere Back on Tour and all those tours, you see that part of my head above the cymbal. Now you see that.
Okay.
Like
the nose.
So, you know, it's quite noticeable, the actual, you know, the posture that I'm playing with now. So I think that's probably the only change to the kit that I made. Well, yeah, it is. It's the only change.
Okay, Nico, before the last question, I think Gilson has one more about religion. Are you okay with that?
With what, mate?
About religion.
Religion, sure.
Yeah. Vai lá, Gilson.
Could you tell us about your conversion to Christianity and how important was that for your life?
Wow. Well, that's a great question. I mean, okay, when I was a kid, my mum and dad, you know, we used to go to Sunday school, and so I was very versed in Christianity. I was, you know, went to Sunday school, and we had religious instruction as a lesson in schools in those days. So as I got older and I started to get wilder and took religion, didn't really play much of a point, and I wasn't God focused. In the 90s, probably I don't know, 98, somewhere around there, maybe earlier, my wife was born again, and she started to read the Bible a lot, and I'd noticed this, and I started to get this calling. I just felt she basically said, "Want to come to church with me one day?" I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll come." And it was Sunday morning, lying sleeping, and I thought, she says, "You coming?" I said, "I'm ready to go." I said, And I'll tell you what, it was as though God had gone like this: "Get out, come on." And I thought, oh, okay. So anyway, that was the first thing that I felt was really important. I mean, that wasn't me. Anyway, so we go to this church, and it was a little church called Hammett Street Church, and I wasn't that impressed. It was all about raising funds and stuff. But to now I know that to function and do charity work and missionary work, they need money. But this particular sermon wasn't my cup of tea. So I thought, oh, here we go. That's the same sort of thing everybody's doing. Anyway, we went to a different church called Spanish River Church, and I went in there, and it was in the old church. They had a chapel, and then later on they built a bigger church. But I remember standing in, and the band was phenomenal. The music was just, I'd never been to a church where there was this contemporary rock music with praise tunes. And I remember standing, listening to this music, thinking, this is fantastic. The pastor comes out, starts his sermon, and he said a prayer. Normally, later on, he would close in prayer, and he was just going to a sermon. He basically said, look, where you're standing now, ask God into your life. Ask Jesus Christ. He'll come in there. Give your heart to him. And I stood, and I was closed eyes, and I swear that God and Jesus pushed me, and I kept moving forward as though I was being pushed over. I couldn't feel anything, and I thought, and this is God's honest truth, isn't it, right, love? I thought, I haven't had a drink. I'm not, in a hangover here, because I thought, there's a rake, the church has got a rake, but I felt this presence. And that right there and then, I gave my heart to God, and and I asked Jesus in my life. And there's times where I turn away from the cross, but believe me, when you're God focused and Jesus Christ centered, changes your life. Awesome. I didn't stop drinking straight away. I still was partying, and then looking at what happened to Bruce when he had his cancer scare, and there's sitting on a plane with this serious hangover. It's basically, I said a prayer to God and said, dear Lord, I promise I'm not going to have another drink. And that was 5 years and 2 months ago.
Wow.
So, but the way it changed my life is it never makes you sinless, but it makes you sin less. We're all sinners, we've all got crosses to bear, baggage that we always hang around. And sometimes when you love the Lord and you read your Bible and you say your prayers to the governor, some of that baggage is all of a sudden's gone. And it's a great savior for me.
Amazing. So the last question.
Yeah.
Have you guys in the band ever talked about how important the Iron Maiden legacy is in the metal world? Has anyone in the band started talking about retirement? I can't imagine the metal world without Iron Maiden.
Well, that's a great question. No, I don't think we know how important our music has been to many generations of people, and we know how blessed we are to have, even when we're not here, it will still continue to bless other generations to come, even when we're not here. To talk about retirement, no. I mean, we all know, I'm the oldest in the band by 4 years. Steve's the next oldest now, and then there's, I think, Dave, Adrian, Yannick, and Bruce, and we're all in our 60s. And I'm going to quote paraphrase a quote that Jan made from many years ago, which stands for me. He said, "We'll never become a parody of ourselves." And that means that if we can't cut the cake, I'm not that kind of cake, but, getting on stage and doing what we love to do together. If we can't do that, then we'll hang it up. Okay. And as I said to you, if I can't do it, I'll hand the baton over to someone else, give them a pair of sticks and a drumstick. And thank you for that, Achilles, saying, it wouldn't be the same with another guy. And I don't think it would be. It never is.
Absolutely.
It's one of the reasons that Led Zeppelin never toured again. They came together with Jason many years down the road. And Robert Plant said 2 years after Bonzo left us in 1980, it's not gonna work. No one can replace him. Now, I'm not John Bonham, but I am a very key figure and a part and an essence.
Absolutely.
But we know, and we don't live on that laurel of like, yes, we're one of the top heavy metal bands, if not the top heavy metal band in the world. You know, I think we could probably, and I personally think that that's what we are. You've got to go some to find another band. I mean, got Deep Purple out there, but they're not really touring as much as perhaps they could do because they're all like in the same boat as us. They're getting on. But there's not many bands that left a legacy like Maiden.
Absolutely not.
You know, and, again, you know, I'm really sad that I've got to wait another year, or it will be almost another year till I get on tour again.
Yeah.
You know, so to answer the question about how, you know, there was people saying, how do you keep, you know, keeping trim and what do you do to prepare for a tour? As I said earlier, you know, I was practicing an hour and a half a day, not just the tunes, doing solos, just doing my chops together and physically going walking, working out. I've got a teeter table in the other room. We have something to hang up upside down on to try and get my lower back, helping that. So, you know, yes. And so as long as I keep myself fit and, you know, I can, in a year's time, still get out and drive the guys, then there's no reason why we can't do it for another 2 or 3 years. But no one said, oh, well, I did. I had a bit of a momentary thing. After the next tour, I might only tour like for 2 months of the year, you know. I'd only do 2 or 3 shows a week. And Rod's like, oh, you can't really do that. Ooh.
It's gonna be too expensive to keep the band all this time just to do
I said, listen, I said, so here's the thing, right? About a year ago, Tico Torres is he's like my brother from another mother. And I called him up and I said, here, mate. I said, you know, you're just a year younger than me. So how do you take this? How do you, at your age, you feel, you know, you can still go out and play all these shows? He says, 60 gigs a year. 60.
Wow.
A year. We do 70 over 4 months.
I know.
Roughly, something like that. Maybe a bit longer. But, you know, and I said, so, hang on a minute. But Bon Jovi aren't Iron Maiden, and Iron Maiden aren't Bon Jovi.
I know.
We could sell stadiums, but Bon Jovi know they can sell stadiums. You know, and therefore they can do those larger gigs and command larger fees, etc., to pay for the downtime. Maiden's a different animal. We have to work. You know, there's no point in this doing 3 gigs 1 week and having a week off, doing 4 gigs a week later, 2 weeks, like, you know, because the machine, you have to oil it.
Absolutely.
And this is honestly, this is why we have to do these shows like that. You know, 2 gigs, days off, 2 days off. I said to Rod, look, as long as I have a clear day off after a show, 1 full day, not a travel day, which is classified as a day off.
It's different. Yeah, day off. You're going to sit your ass inside a plane or a bus, and that's it.
Yeah, well, I this is the weirdest thing. Years and years back, you know, I started to fly in the 80s. I got my private license in 86. And Bruce kind of was, you know, he kind of inspired him later to get he took it all the way, 747 pilot and whatnot. And I was mentioning at the end of the 80s, why don't we fly? And Harry's like, I don't like flying, I don't like little planes. and then later on, when we took this, we did a private flight somewhere. We got a G4 jet to this gig, and it was like Harry went, "Oh, I like this. This is pretty nice." And so when we got Ian Day as our tour director working for us, he convinced everyone this is the best thing to do is go fly privately, and we haven't looked back.
Yeah,
especially with a 747.
Absolutely not.
You know what? Just one thing. Bruce scored 100%, 100% in his written exam. on that 747 test.
Wow.
Which is unheard of.
It's a genius.
Yeah, and also this is really good for the band, you know, traveling in the private jet. This is huge.
Yeah,
really cool.
it is. Well, the thing is, you know, the great beauty of that is you get from A to B rather quickly. And in Europe, you know, I opted to say, right, let's do the show. I want to go back to London, have that day off, and the rest of the next day, right, in the morning, go to the airport 1 o'clock, fly to the next city where the next gig is. When the trucks go overnight to the next show, that's the beautiful thing about it. It gets a bit expensive, but then you put it in the budget. If you haven't got it in the budget, then you have to make a different arrangement. But we haven't been on a bus for years and years. And personally, you know, one of the best things that was invented, you know, when you ask someone, what is, in your opinion, is the best thing ever invented, right? Some people say telephone, the toilet, flushing toilet, VCRs, whatever. Fine, silicone earplugs.
Okay.
Silicone earplugs, little silicone discs. You don't put them in there, you put them around the outside. Perfect.
Perfect.
I could have sat on a bus for years. I said to Steve, you know, we could get rid of the plane. I'm okay sleeping on a bus now. Steve, funny enough, Steve is a road whore.
Yeah, I know.
He loves buses. He would prefer to just get it off the gig, get on a tour bus, and go all over wherever he's going on the tour bus. And he loves it. He finds it soothing. You know, to sleep on a tour bus with the noise of the engine and the rocking motion of the movement. Me, on the other hand, in the old days when I was like really pissed up, whatever, you know, it didn't matter. Oh, those were the days.
Okay, Nico, thank you so much for your time. We spent 2 hours and 15 minutes. We covered everything that we really want to know. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for your attention for the Brazilian audience. And I'm going to keep this safe and sound with me forever.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
This changed my life. So if I'm this Aquiles Priester that I am nowadays, I owe this to you. Thank you so much for your music and for your drumming and for inspiring people like you do.
Thank you so much. Thank
you so much.
Thank you, mate. And all you lovely people out there that have tuned in, and, you know, God bless you. Make sure you wash your hands. Right? Yeah. You know, sing happy birthday to yourself. No one else is going to anyway. So, you know, happy birthday to you. And do that, right? And then just be safe and you know, put the masks on. And social distancing, they're kind of saying, well, so got the mask on, ain't so bad. So maybe you can't have a hug like we all wish we could do, but just be sensible and let's hope that we can get over this. We know we will sooner or later. Hopefully it'll be sooner, and we'll all come down and see you. And Aquiles, thank you so very much for your beautiful heart and your fantastic, phenomenal talent. And I am honoured that I had a hand in you starting off and doing what you do. You are a stunning player, mate. And Gilson, thanks so very much. God bless everybody. Stay safe and well.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
See you. Good night.
Wonderful evening. Thank you. Bye.
See you later, mate. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, meu Deus. O que aconteceu aqui? Eu só tô triste que eu queria pedir pra ele assinar meu disco, mas não ia dar certo, né?
Tô em choque. Tô em choque.
Ai, cara.
Meu Deus, cara. Como a vida tem sido boa. Puta que pariu, cara.
Não tem nem como te agradecer.
Cara, eu juro, ó. Esse negócio esteve comigo todos esses anos, cara. 28 anos. 28 anos. Muito
Você não mostra pra ninguém isso aí, né? Porque eu nunca vi.
Não, nunca ninguém soube. Nunca.
Vai que
tem
alguém
um monte,
rouba, né?
Cara, nunca ninguém soube que isso aqui existia. Entendeu? Nunca falei. E eu tava esperando uma situação dessas que pudesse ficar registrado, porque se eu falasse pro Nico numa feira, numa coisa, não ia ser a mesma coisa do que ter um negócio registrado, né? Eu vi você, tipo, se indispondo com algumas pessoas aqui no chat. O que aconteceu? Eu não quero nem ver, cara. Eu não consigo entender como é que pessoas podem reclamar de uma situação como essa. Gilson, vamos começar rapidamente, porque hoje eu quero celebrar. Hoje é domingo, eu não precisei... Eu fui para a sala só limpar a minha sala. Eu entrei na piscina com meu filho por 15 minutos, que foi o tempo que eu me dei para ser vagabundo hoje. O resto do tempo eu fiquei divulgando a live, fiquei colocando os arquivos que eu gravei ontem e tal. E agora vamos dar uma repassada nessas 19 perguntas para as pessoas, né?
Uhum.
Então você põe na tela outra vez em português para a galera ler e a gente vai falar rapidamente, né?
Quero agradecer a quem compreendeu, né, que isso é uma live e que seria muito difícil a gente ficar parando o Nico para a gente traduzir em português na hora, né? Seria pedir demais para paciência.
Seria pedir para ele, entendeu, cara? E, tipo, cara,
Sim.
eu não vou mentir para vocês, eu não entendo todas as palavras que ele fala, entendeu? Tem horas que eu não entendo também, entendeu? Então,
teve
assim,
uma hora que ele até deu uma zoada na gente. Assim,
exatamente assim, vocês não entenderam essa porra. Foi bem na hora que eu tava olhando a porra do chat, entendeu? Que eu via um monte de coisa ali, entendeu? E aí, quando você presta atenção, quando você lê, você não tá escutando, né, cara? Entendeu? Mas, cara, é assim, se hoje eu entendo, antigamente eu entendia muito menos. Então, cara, inglês é assim. E dependendo da pessoa que você pega para falar, por causa de acento, um monte de coisa, se o cara fala rápido, ele ainda fala super... Ele ainda fala
mais difícil.
Ele ainda fala super bem, entendeu? E, tipo assim, é fácil entender o que ele fala. Vamos lá, então. Sobre a primeira pergunta, né, que a gente perguntou o que estava acontecendo na vida deles, vocês não precisam nem falar isso, né? Mas vocês sabem que as turnês do Iron Maiden foram canceladas, eles esperaram um pouquinho até os países se posicionarem, né? Eles estavam esperando os países onde eles iam tocar se posicionar para saber se ia poder fazer a turnê ou não. Então, vocês sabem que isso aconteceu. As turnês foram postergadas para daqui a um ano, então só em 2021. Aí a segunda, se você quiser, viu, Gilson, complementar também, você fica à vontade, né? Na segunda aqui, ó, eu perguntei para ele assim, né, o que estava acontecendo na vida dele antes de ele entrar no Iron Maiden e se financeiramente mudou imediatamente, né? E ele falou que falou das bandas que ele estava tocando e ele falou que quando ele entrou na banda ele recebia um salário, né? Que aos poucos foi chegando no valor que as outras pessoas tocavam. Então não foi tipo assim, vamos exemplificar igual quando o baixista novo do Metallica, o Robert, entrou e os caras deram $1 milhão, fez assim, ó, ajeita a tua vida e agora fica pra banda. Então foi gradativamente, né, que ele começou a melhorar. E aí, na pergunta 3, né, eu perguntei se ele sentiu algum tipo de reação, repressão, assim, das pessoas que eram muito fãs do Clive, mas ele falou, assim, que não teve isso porque eles gravaram o Peace of Mind antes, entendeu? Então, não foi igual o Bruce Dickinson, que antes dele gravar o The Number of the Beast, ele fez uns 10 shows tocando as músicas do Killers antes de apresentar material próprio. Então, logicamente, se você pegar o setlist daquela turnê da World Peace Tour, você vai ver que tem muitas músicas do Peace of Mind e menos músicas antigas. Então, isso para ele falou que eles também conversaram sobre os arranjos que ele tinha que fazer e tal. Então, eles conversaram entre banda e decidiram qual ia ser a melhor forma. Então, ele não sentiu isso.
Ele já tinha amizade com eles também, né? Pela turnê.
Exatamente, já tinha tocado. E aí, a quarta a gente pulou.
Acho que foi assim que a gente pulou por causa disso, né? Que ele
exatamente, porque assim, eu não ia perguntar para ele se ele tinha ensaiado, se ele teve tempo ou não, porque ele não ensaiou as músicas antigas antes de gravar o disco novo. Ele gravou primeiro o novo disco e depois que eles decidiram, né? E aí, essa aqui, se você quiser, você pode falar, Gilson, da introdução de Where Eagles There, que foi interessante que ele falou, né?
Foi legal pra caralho. Foi engraçado porque ele disse que até o Bruce tira para ele os créditos, né? Diz assim, eu também dei ideia aí, porque eles ficaram no estúdio tentando bolar alguma introdução. O Steve disse para ele que ele tinha liberdade para criar, fazer uma virada que pegasse o kit inteiro, mas não estava rolando, até que alguém cantou lá, e ele, isso aqui, e daí foi onde foi mesmo, onde rolou.
Ele falou que até o Steve deu uma ciscada ali na bateria, ele tentou, entendeu? Explicar as coisas e tal. Então foi assim que eles chegaram na concepção daquele disco. Vai no próximo. Essa daqui foi muito legal, né? Que eu perguntei para ele qual que era a opinião, né? Qual a importância da opinião no Steve Harris. E aí, tipo assim, o Steve Harris, ele até fala, né? Aquelas coisas que são legais pra caralho, aquelas coisas quando você vê ele cantando as músicas, igual os DVDs que a gente assiste em casa. Então aquilo ali também foi muito legal. E aí ele falou que quando o Steve Harris chegou para apresentar aquela música, né? O Steve Harris mostrou para ele assim, né? Cantando assim, e aí ele falou assim, tá, mas isso aí vai ser a guitarra. Eu falei, não, eu vou fazer isso aqui. O que você vai tocar então em cima disso? Então foi uma coisa legal, assim, que ele falou que praticamente nada, né, sempre tem uma direção do Steve Harris, porque ele é o compositor principal da banda e ele opina nas ideias de todos. Como a gente já ouviu ele falando, né, nos DVDs do Iron Maiden, ele dá uma maidenizada nas ideias das pessoas que trazem as músicas. Muito bem, segue, Gilson. Essa aqui foi boa. Vai lá, você.
7, né?
Fala aí.
Quando você ia gravar as músicas dos discos dos anos 80, todos já estavam com suas partes prontas, até mesmo o Bruce, ou a versão final da música se formatando enquanto a banda ia gravando. E ele falou que eles se encontravam, né, faziam um círculo, ficavam criando, compondo juntos os arranjos. Né? Inclusive, o Bruce também ia, acho que ia montando junto com eles isso. Né?
Junto com eles, E uma coisa legal que eu vi, assim, que ele falou assim, que tipo... Não sei se vocês viram que eu falei assim, quando ele estava respondendo, eu falei, tá, mas quando você está aprendendo uma música, você aprende todas as músicas e depois vai gravar? Ele falou, não, eu aprendo uma música, como a gente está dentro do estúdio já, do mesmo estúdio, né? onde a gente está ensaiando as músicas, é onde está já o setup de gravação, entendeu? Então, assim, quando a gente senta ali, acaba uma música, já está pronta, eu vou lá e gravo ela, porque daqui a 3 dias eu nem me lembro mais o que eu fiz. E depois, na hora de começar a turnê, ele vai lá e aprende novamente a ideia.
Legal.
Essa aqui é boa,
a parte
Gilson.
do Slavery Tour também, né? O Slavery Tour... Bom, fala aí.
Não, vai lá, segue.
E a Mickey lê a pergunta. Falando do tamanho, né, da turnê, que foi uma das maiores, e se isso afetou eles, né? E o interessante é ele dizer que a gente sempre espera que a turnê que mais incomodou eles foi a maior, que foi a World Slavery Tour, mas ele falou que já no Peace of Mind eles já estavam azedados, já com quantidade de shows seguidos e tal.
Então é isso aí, e aí eu perguntei para ele, né, se naquela época ele também pensou em sair, porque depois daquilo, né, o Bruce Dickinson, tanto que no disco Summer in Time ele não compôs nada, porque as ideias dele não tinham nada a ver com o disco que eles queriam, então ele não compôs nada, e aí ele pegou e falou que na verdade ele quis sair na turnê anterior, e não naquilo ali, né, não naquela época, então foi legal pra caralho. Teve um monte de coisas que ele falou que eu não sabia, cara, e olha que eu conheço Iron Maiden pra caralho, né. E aí o Gilson perguntou essa daqui, né, Gilson?
Quais eram as lembranças dele
Iron Maiden, né?
do Brasil, do primeiro show e tal. Ele disse que realmente todo mundo teve problema na monitoração e que contou mais sobre o Bruce também, né, na questão do Bruce lá quebrando a guitarra e machucando a cara dele e tal.
Que foi na Revelations, né, que naquela parte... Nessa parte o Bruce fazia a guitarra dedilhada e depois dessa parte vem o pam bam bam, e nessa hora que ele bateu ali e ele falou assim que a gente até falou, esse foi a melhor, o maior público, né? E ele falou, a gente não vê isso. Foi legal pra caralho. A gente não vê isso como o nosso maior público porque nós não éramos os headliners naquela noite. E ele falou que ele ficou feliz quando eles voltaram para o Rock in Rio em 2001. Aí eles eram headliner e eles gravaram aquele show. E eles falaram que venderam 250 mil ingressos e ficou 50 mil para fora.
Foi legal também que ele falou do mar de pessoas, né? Quando ele estava na bateria, tudo escuro ainda antes de entrar. E olhou assim e viu que parecia uma onda, ele disse.
Muito foda. Aquelas cenas até hoje, quando você entra no YouTube e vê aquelas coisas de show, é surreal, cara. É muito foda.
E legal ele dizer que ele assiste, né? Que ele ainda assiste os vídeos, escuta os discos, depois mais pra frente ele...
Legal pra caralho.
Ele falou disso.
Aí eu perguntei aqui na questão 10 se ele tinha alguma... Eu falei pra ele, né, que o disco Summer in Time é o que eu gosto mais, porque eu comecei a tocar heavy metal por causa desse disco. E se ele tinha alguma lembrança especial, né, das gravações desse disco e por que eles só tocaram a The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner no primeiro show só, né?
Essa música é animal, né?
É animal demais, só que ela é muito tensa
é difícil, né?
Pra cantar, assim, e pra soar bem, né? Então, assim, ele falou que, cara, quando eles foram gravar esse disco, eles já estavam acostumados com o estúdio, que era o terceiro disco que eles estavam gravando no Compass Point, e eu até falei que eu tive a chance de ir lá bater a foto lá na frente, quando eu estava num cruzeiro com o Mike Orlando.
Nas Bahamas, né?
Cara, exatamente. Aí, cara, a gente pagou uma puta de uma grana para ir de táxi lá, só para ir lá e bater umas fotos e tal. Tava fechado, mas eu tenho a foto na frente do estúdio onde foi gravado o disco mais importante da minha vida. E ele falou que essa música eles tocaram e que simplesmente ela não soou bem. E eles, possivelmente, era o primeiro show. Eles poderiam ter testado mais, mas eles já viram que não ia dar, entendeu? E, cara, só tem registro, isso você acha no YouTube, não tem registro em vídeo até hoje, só tem registro de áudio. É legal pra caralho, mas você vê que a música, como a gente chama, como a gente brinca, né? Eu e o Fábio, essa música não tá groovando, entendeu? Não sei o que é. Você grava a música em estúdio, e você vai tocar ao vivo, ela não groova. Não sei o que é. E aí em estúdio ela é perfeita, mas ao vivo não rola. Segue, Gilson.
Essa aqui ele te quebrou a resposta, né?
Quebrou, só que eu não sabia e eu também não vi vídeo. Para mim, eles nunca tocaram Alexander the Great. E essa pergunta, quem mandou também foi o alemão, o Edu Falasse. Porra, pergunta para eles por que eles nunca tocaram Alexander the Great. Então essa aqui, né, é por causa do Edu, ele pediu. E aí eu até falei, né, que eu achava que era porque eles tocaram essa música, que como eles não tocaram essa música na turnê do disco, que era a Somewhere on Tour, porque eu achava que ela poderia ser similar com a The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, que
tem
querendo ou não,
estrutura,
né, tamanho, estrutura. E ele falou, não, a gente tocou essa música, assim, num 5 shows, mas a gente não manteve ele no set. Então, assim, eu não sei, pelo menos nos programas das turnês deles, os oficiais, não aparece essa música. Mas eu tenho, né? Eu tenho essas coisas todas. Para quem não sabe, ó, para quem não sabe, eu sou afiliado ao fã-clube do Iron Maiden, então eu recebo todas essas coisas. Tem no site deles, tem todos os setlists de todas as épocas, não está lá, mas eu que vou falar.
Não vou discutir.
Eu não sou boca de burro, entendeu? Que nem certas pessoas que estão aqui no chat. Ó, o alemão tá aqui, ó. O alemão tá aqui no chat, aqui, ó. Valeu, alemão, tá ali, ó, viu só? Brothers in Arms, eu não esqueço dos parceiros, hein? Vai lá, segue lá, Gilson. Ó, obrigado por estar aí, hein, alemão. Você podia estar no petisquinho já, hein? Domingão à noite e tal.
Ó, essa também foi legal que ele falou. Essa foi a polêmica, né? A primeira pergunta polêmica da época da saída do Bruce, né? Quando eles gravaram o último show, ele citou que, na verdade, isso já estava marcado há mais de um ano. Então, eles tinham que cumprir o contrato desse show. E já estava todo mundo azedo, né, cara?
Isso eu não sabia também, né? Mas ele falou, não, isso já estava, tipo assim, já tinha sido marcado 6 meses antes da tour, e aquela tour ia ser pequena, tal, não sei o quê, tipo 6 meses, só que já estava marcada, então já tinha sido vendido. E se você olhar esse show, é num lugar super pequeno, cara.
Ele falou que tinha tipo 2.200 pessoas,
cara,
uma coisa assim.
Pequeno pra caralho, assim, o lugar. E aí eu falei pra ele, né? Perguntei se eles estavam, como é que estavam as coisas, e eu vi que ele tinha ficado puto lá na época, e até perguntei se tinha camarim separado, e teve realmente,
tinha,
né? Tinha mesmo, tal, não sei o quê. E aí no final da resposta, eu até falei para ele assim, cara, tem uma hora assim que você vendo o show é muito estranho, que você vê o Steve Harris e o Bruce Dickinson perto um do outro, Dave Murray e Bruce Dickinson perto do outro, né? Os dois olhando reto, e eles tipo assim, eles não olham pro outro. Ele falou, tava realmente assim, e ele falou assim, eu odiei o que eu toquei naquele show, eu não gostei da minha performance. Então basicamente o Bruce tava agitando no lugar deles, junto com o Yannick Diers, que eles eram amigos, sempre foram amigos, mesmo quando o Bruce saiu, eles continuaram amigos, entendeu? Então foi legal pra caralho saber desse tipo de coisa. Hoje eu fiz uma entrevista de fã, então vocês me desculpem, que vocês que mandaram o superchat e tal, não sei o quê. Cara, a gente nem leu, porque, cara, a gente ficou 2 horas e 15 com ele.
Eu fiquei olhando ele na tela para acreditar que era ele na tela.
Que era ele. E você lembra, Gilson, que a gente, no começo, lá no backstage, eu perguntei assim, quantas lives que você já fez, Nico, né? Agora, nessa época, ele falou, eu fiz 3. Eu fiz uma com o Modern Drummer, com a revista Modern Drummer. Eu fiz uma ontem com o Carmine Eyepiece e com o Vini Epis. E aí tô fazendo essa com você hoje. Cara,
ele assim,
me senti...
Quem é esse cara no meio da gente?
Ele falou assim, quem é esse cara no meio da gente aí? Aí eu expliquei para ele, o Gilson é o cara que me ajuda a fazer o show aqui. Eles chamam isso de live
Gilson,
show, né? Aí ele falou, Gilson. Aí ele falou, aí eu expliquei para ele, falei, ó, a galera vai mandar superchat, tá? O Gilson vai ficar de olho. Essa grana tá indo
Não fiquei.
Essa grana está indo para a União Musical lá do Cássio Cunha. Eu falei que era uma entidade que estava tomando conta de músicos e de equipe técnica. Ele falou, cara, que coisa maravilhosa, pô, que sensacional. A gente ficou tipo uns 10 minutos batendo um papo no backstage para ter certeza também que a transmissão estava boa, que a gente poderia entender e ele poderia ouvir o que a gente falou. Graças a Deus, não teve nenhuma vez que ele falou assim,
nenhum problema.
Aquiles, repete a pergunta, porque eu não entendi e tal. Ia ser foda. Mas foi legal pra caralho. Foi muito legal. Segue, Gilson. Qual foi a pergunta?
Deixa eu te perguntar, porque isso eu queria ter perguntado, de repente você sabe. Aquele show de mágica que rola no Raising Hell ali, será que já estava combinado antes também de eles saberem que o Bruce ia sair? Ou se foi uma coisa, tipo assim, já que ele vai sair, vamos fazer uma papagaiada aqui, de matar o Bruce e tal.
Tava já, tanto é que ele falou, na verdade, eu conheci o Simon Drake, que ele não lembrava do sobrenome, mas eu lembrava, Simon Drake.
Do Mágico, né?
Exatamente, ele falou, eu conheci ele em 76, quando eu estava fazendo um show, eu não sei se era com o Trust ou com o Pat Travers, isso eu não lembro mesmo, mas eu sei que ele falou. Então, mas isso aí eu lembrei. Então é isso aí. Segue, Gilson. Foi muito legal.
Tá.
Gilson, agora
virou Gilson.
Agora virou outro nível. E eu
lembrei
também,
dos tempos que eu morava nos Estados Unidos, era Gilson.
Gilson. Aí teve uma hora que eu olhei aqui no superchat aqui e eu vi aqui o Adair bem assim, meu Deus, eu vivi para nascer ex. Eu vivi para ver isso. O Gilson falando em inglês com o Nico. Ai, meu Deus, eu não tô acreditando. Eu vi isso. Foi bem nessa hora que ele falou isso, que ele falou assim, vocês não entenderam essa piada, mas o meu técnico lá na época entendia. Eu falei, puta que pariu. Tinha que ser o Adair boca podre, me atrapalhar bem na hora para ser um boca de burro.
Mas eu não entendi a piada mesmo que ele foi fazer.
Cara, eu sei, mas tipo assim, se eu não entendesse alguma coisa assim, e ele falasse, tá, e aí? Eu ia falar assim, cara, fala de novo, porque eu não entendi, eu não tenho problema nenhum. Às vezes eu não entendo quando a pessoa fala em português, imagina em inglês. Qual o problema disso? Segue, Gilson.
Perguntou, você tocou com o segundo ride. Essa parte do segundo ride eu não sabia, cara.
Ele tocou com esse segundo
ride. Falou que ficar mais confortável, né?
Se vocês pegarem os vídeos mais antigos, as fotos até o Fear of the Dark, você vai ver que ele tem... Não, se você pegar aquela foto do Somewhere in Time, que ele tá gravando o disco, né, você consegue ver assim que tem um outro ride, e aí ao invés de 3 crashes, só tem 2, entendeu? Então aí ele tirou aquilo, porque, 2 rides, Amanhã eu vou postar essa foto só para vocês verem, né? Para vocês verem que eu tenho o Tourbook aqui, mas eu não vou pegar agora para vocês não perderem o fio aqui, mas amanhã eu posto e vocês vão ver que tinham 2 rides, né? Então ele tinha espaço só para 2 crashes. E ele falou que tinha uma época, né, que ele começou a falar, putz, né? E basicamente ele usa o bell, ele sempre usou o bell, ele sempre falou isso. Agora, hoje em dia, que ele tá tocando mais para baixo, porque o braço dele cansa mais, então ele toca mais para baixo. Até a marca nas fotos que estão nesses Tourbooks mais recentes, você vê que a marca da baqueta é mais para baixo e não em cima, como era nessa foto que eu vou mostrar da Somewhere on Tour, na verdade, da gravação do disco Somewhere in Time. Então, ele falou assim, aí eu tirei esse prato e eu coloquei aquele Rude de 17 que você conhece bem, eu conheço bem, porque ele me deu me desculpa, mas ele me deu um daqueles lá, autografado, com
abuso
aquela pintura, abuso de estrutura total. Eu pedi para ele, na cara dura. Aí ele me deu.
teve uma coisa que ele contou logo no começo, que foi sobre as baterias, os equipamentos deles roubados, né?
Exatamente.
Aí ele falou assim,
ele falou.
se vocês aí no Sul, aí, souberem, no Brasil, souberem de alguma coisa, avisem o Aquiles. Aí tu pegou e falou assim, ó, como quem diz assim, dá pra mim.
Dá pra mim também.
Pau no cu.
Bom, é isso aí. Um dia ainda vou ter um kit igual dele. Eu já tentei lá com a Mapex, né? Tentar fazer um kit igual dele, mas ele fala assim, cara, a gente não tem as medidas aqui na China. Por isso que eu perguntei lá na metade, mas no final,
ele fazia,
se a bateria fazia na Alemanha ou na China, é na Alemanha, por isso que eles têm as medidas lá. Segue, Gilson.
14, né? O que você pode dizer sobre o período do Blaze Bayley? Ele falou de uma forma bem política aqui, né? Ele teve cuidado de não queimar o cara, mas, como ele disse, eles ouviram milhares de fitas de releases e tal, e basicamente o que eles queriam era um cara que fosse inglês, né? Tanto que na pergunta foi perguntado por que eles não colocaram, por exemplo, o Michael Kiske, que era da mesma produção, né? Era um artista do Rod também, mas eles optaram em manter um cara que fosse inglês, né? Eu acho que isso contou até mais do que a própria voz, né? Pelo jeito.
Com certeza. Por isso que eu falei, eu sempre achei isso, né? Mas eu nunca quis perguntar esse tipo de coisa, mas hoje era um dia de fã, então mandei bala. E aí, na pergunta 15, eu perguntei, né, falando sobre o Rod, qual era a importância que ele tinha fora da vida pessoal dele, né? Se ele pode tocar com outras pessoas, tal, não sei o quê, ou se ele é um artista exclusivo. A última parte da pergunta que eu falei, se isso se aplica também para os outros, ele não falou, eu não insisti, mas ele falou que basicamente assim, todas as coisas que ele vai fazer fora da banda, ele pergunta em consideração a história toda da banda, tal. Então, quando ele recebe quando ele recebe até de pessoas próximas assim, com convites para fazer as coisas, ele fala assim, olha, eu quero, mas você sabe muito bem que eu tenho que submeter isso ao empresariamento da banda, espero que você entenda nada pessoal, é somente uma forma pessoal. Sensacional. Segue, Gilson.
Parte da batera agora, né? Que perguntou por que ele saiu voltou para a Sonor e logo saiu, né? Depois de 4 anos, né? E começou com a British Drum Company. Né? Então isso aí foi bem interessante também, como ele.
Cara, falou,
né, cara?
ele falou de umas coisas assim que eu imaginei que acontecesse com pessoas tipo meros mortais, tipo a gente, assim, né? De um patrocinador, por algum motivo, não exceder as expectativas, né, do que você está pedindo. E aí ele, resumindo, que isso aqui é uma coisa muito pessoal, né? E eu até falei assim, né? Se tipo assim, deixa eu ver se foi nessa pergunta ou se foi... não, deixa eu ver. E eu perguntei para ele também se esse tipo de coisa, se ele perguntava pro Rod Smallwood também para entrar na parte de patrocínio de verdade. Ele falou, não tem, nunca recebi
ele falou,
nada.
nunca recebeu, né?
Nunca recebi nada, tal. Então foi muito legal e eu não quero entrar mais nesse tipo de coisa, mas simplesmente, resumidamente, ele falou assim, como eu voltei para a empresa há somente 4 anos, se já está acontecendo esse tipo de situação agora, imagine daqui a 2 anos para frente. Então, a gente resolveu, né, apertar as mãos e ir embora, e aí a outra empresa fez uma bateria exatamente igual a dele, e era uma pessoa que já trabalhava com ele numa outra época lá da Premier.
E ele tem então, réplicas, né, dessas baterias lá
exatamente,
na loja dele.
Então, assim, eu me lembro que até saíram, né, umas dessas réplicas que a Premier fez para venda, tudo. E eu vou falar uma coisa que é em off aqui, né, que nunca foi dita, mas nessa época que eles estavam lançando esses kits, tem até um vídeo meu, eu mostrando a minha caixa signature pro Nico, e ele falou, né, se você não gostaria de usar Premiere também, porque daí se a gente fizer uma turnê de workshops pela América do Sul, você podia abrir, né? E aí eu peguei e falei para ele bem assim, cara, ó, essa caixa que você acabou de ver, tem até vídeo a gente falando da caixa, assim, é uma caixa signature que tá vindo aqui, né? Eu tô com a Mapex já faz quase 15 anos, a gente tem uma relação muito boa, nada do que eu pedi nunca foi dito não. Ele falou, não, Aquiles, lealdade é uma coisa que eu respeito pra caralho, eu sei que você é um cara paz, assim como eu entendo perfeitamente, mas assim, se você tiver algum problema no futuro, tal, você sabe que eu tenho total controle do que acontece nas coisas da Premiere, assim como eu já tive também uma oferta dessa de total controle de pessoas que trabalham com outras marcas grandes, mas eu sempre tive o total controle da minha carreira junto com a Mapex, né? Então, sim, assim, tipo, assim, sou muito feliz com a Mapex, porque eles nunca existiu um motivo sequer para eu não querer mais tocar a marca. Então, é isso aí. Segue, Gilson.
Animal.
Isso foi muito bom.
Lealdade é tudo.
Então, aí,
então,
foi essa questão pulou, né? Que a gente pulou, né? Que a gente pulou porque ele falou, né? Que eu falei assim, numa situação como a sua, onde a bateria será usada numa tour do Iron Maiden, você precisa submeter as suas escolhas para o Rod. E aí ele falou, né? Que quando ele foi trocar, ele sentou com o Rod, falou com o Andy, explicou tudo, então já estava claro que ele fazia esse tipo de coisa, né? A penúltima pergunta.
18. Hoje em dia você tem algum tipo de preparação especial antes de iniciar uma tour? Que ficou mais difícil em todos esses anos tocando o seu drum kit, que se mantém o mesmo e é muito pessoal. Eu achei muito legal. Ele falou que deu uma inclinadinha aliás, deixou um pouquinho mais reto.
Um pouco mais reto,
para puxar um pouco mais a coluna dele, que estava ficando meio vadiozão. Aí ele fazendo assim para poder tocar um pouco mais de cima, para poder tirar realmente o som do tambor, porque senão ele ia tocar só no aro.
No aro.
E ele falou que antes as pessoas viam ele só aqui, agora estão começando a ver aqui.
Estão vendo aqui. E ele também falou que, tipo assim, ele tinha um outro prato que ficava mais longe, que era de 24, então ele procura tocar assim, ele não faz esforço, né, para virar demais o corpo, e o tom de 6 e de 8, ele raramente ele usa hoje em dia, né, e aí ele começa no 10 e 12, e aí ele chegou a comer, aí eu falei para ele, né, muita gente dos anos 80 mudou demais a bateria, né, tipo, reduziu o tamanho das peças para ficar mais fácil para tocar. E ele não, e eu achava isso muito legal. E ele falou assim, deixa eu te contar uma coisa, então. Teve uma vez que eu sugeri isso, né?
Isso foi legal.
Pro chefão, né? Pro Steve Harris. Sempre quando ele faz assim, né? Que ele imita o Steve Harris, deixando o cabelo pra falar assim. E é bem assim que ele faz, né? Então, ele pegou e falou assim, não, eu vou tirar umas peças aqui, outras ali e tal, não sei o quê, né? E aí o Steve Harris falou, eu não sei, ele falou que não, que ele falou isso, mas eu não sei se não era uma brincadeira, né? Mas ele falou assim, não, o Steve Harris falou assim, não, pode deixar do jeito que tá. E aí a principal razão, porque ele falou assim, porque daí se o teu kit ficar menor, as pessoas vão poder ver e todas as mulheres vão cair em cima de você. Foi muito bom isso aí. E aí a penúltima pergunta foi uma que o Gilson até deu a ideia, que eu achei muito, muito legal. E eu não sei se vocês viram, mas eu me senti muito orgulhoso das vezes que ele falou assim, pô, isso é uma pergunta muito boa, porra, legal. Foram umas 2 ou 3 vezes, uma das vezes foi essa que ele falou sobre o cristianismo. Legal, isso aí.
Eu mereço estar aqui, viu?
Aqui é um time.
Perguntei para ele, né, qual era a influência na vida dele de ter se convertido ao cristianismo, quão importante era isso. Eu até tinha pensado em perguntar também se isso tinha alguma coisa a ver com o alcoolismo, porque tem isso em algumas revistas e tal, que cita, mas eu não queria me dispor com a pergunta, né? E ele mesmo comentou que ele parou de beber depois, até porque ele fez uma promessa, né, para caso o Bruce saísse do câncer que ele teve, ele não ia mais beber. E ele comentou que ele foi a convite da esposa dele na igreja a primeira vez. No começo ele não se sentiu muito tocado, mas aí ele trocou de igreja e teve um dado momento que ele estava...
Foi foda. Aquilo ali foi foda.
Ele estava nesse curso e ele disse que ele se sentiu sendo puxado, assim, sendo empurrado, né? Por Jesus, assim. Então ele realmente se sentiu tocado com aquilo e mudou realmente a vida dele, né? Mudou a forma como ele vivia, né? Essa questão até da bebida e tudo mais.
É isso aí. Galera, tipo assim, isso aqui é um resumão, né? Ele falou um monte de coisa, a gente está dando um resumão.
Uma pinçada.
Uma pincelada para que vocês... Porque a gente já está com 2 horas e 47 e hoje eu tenho que fazer...
Quase um novo recorde.
Hoje merece um petisquinho bruto, Gilson. Mesmo, porra, hoje foi um dia muito especial na minha vida.
Vou ter que pedir.
Fico feliz demais que você esteja junto aqui comigo, meu parceiro, né? Tipo... E, ó, tem uma pessoa aqui, o John... O John escreveu aqui, ó, I wish I spoke Portuguese like you guys. I have a lot to say. Actually, John, we are just translating a little bit of this live. If you want to watch the entire live, you just have to press like to go back to the beginning of the live, and then you can watch the entire piece of stuff. Vai lá então, Gilson, última.
Tá, deixa eu voltar aqui que eu já ia botar esse cara na tela. Na última 19, né? Vocês conversam sobre o quão importante é o legado do Maiden no metal mundial. Alguém na banda já falou sobre a aposentadoria, né? E que a gente não conseguiria imaginar um mundo metal sem eles tocando.
É. E bem no começo, né? Eu até falei para ele assim, teve uma hora que ele falou, aquela hora que ele falou assim, puta, eu queria sair, né? Naquela hora, cara, eu falei assim, cara, tipo assim, não existe Iron Maiden sem você, né? E ele ficou feliz pra caralho e tal. E eu realmente, né, não tem como. E aí ele repetiu isso, ó, como você falou, né, Aquiles, porra, eu não acho que eu seja um baterista maravilhoso, mas eu sou o cara certo, mas eu sou o cara certo pra música do Iron Maiden, né? E a gente tá acostumado com isso, né? E, porra, e hoje em dia, eu acho que o Nicko é aquele tipo de cara, assim, que quando você escuta tocar um compasso, você sabe que é ele pelo som característico da bateria dele, né? As viradas dele e tal, tudo. Então foi simplesmente incrível. E ele falou assim, né? Que a gente nunca conversou sobre isso ainda, mas a gente sabe que pela importância que a gente dá para a banda, se em algum momento a gente achar que a gente não é mais capaz de fazer as coisas como a gente tem que fazer, entregar o show que a gente sempre entregou, né? Tipo, aí a gente vai ter que parar, entendeu? Ou então, se eu achar que eu não sou mais apto a tocar as músicas do Iron Maiden como elas têm que ser tocadas, eu vou chegar para a banda e vou falar, olha, eu não consigo mais. Aí vai depender de vocês, se vocês querem achar uma outra pessoa para fazer ou não. Aí que ele falou, né, que teve o caso de bandas como Led Zeppelin, que já tocaram algumas vezes com o filho do Bonham, né, mas que mesmo assim eles foram alguns encontros que eles fizeram durante todo esse tempo, mas que eles não se sentiam à vontade de continuar como Led Zeppelin. Então, foi uma coisa legal. Então é isso, né, bicho?
Eu acho que o fim dele vai ser, quando for, parecido como foi com o Rush, por exemplo. Uma coisa meio natural, meio combinada entre eles, tem muito estardalhaço.
E eu acho que ninguém vai questionar, né? Porque, assim, uma banda que tá quase 40 anos tocando, cara, porra, se você pensar que, tipo... Se você pensar que os caras estão fazendo isso, né, há 40 anos, cara, e eles estão com 3 ou 4 gerações de fãs, né? Então, porra, é muita história, é muito incrível, assim. E não é porque eu sou o maior fã a banda que eu mais gosto, mas, cara, eu nunca vi nenhuma outra banda assim, que tivesse... Eu nunca vi uma outra banda que tivesse, assim, tamanha comoção, né? Sabe, de você ver o pai com o filho na plateia, tal, não sei o quê. E aí você olha o pai orgulhoso do filho estar vestindo a camisa do Iron Maiden. Pô, quando eu vi a Ju pela primeira vez no show em 2016, lá no Brasil, assim, cantando as músicas, assim, falei, nossa, olha só, cara. Ela tinha 16 anos e foi com 16 anos que eu comecei a ouvir Iron Maiden. Então, porra, ela com a camiseta lá e cantando, a gente foi no backstage, foi incrível. Então, é muito foda, entendeu? É muito foda mesmo. E, cara, não existiria coisa mais brutal, assim, do que já aconteceu agora, né? Tipo assim, eu posso falar que eu sou uma pessoa extremamente realizada. A TVMaldita já fez lives com o primeiro cara que me mostrou o que era uma bateria, que foi o João Baroni. A TVMaldita fez hoje live com o Nicko, que foi o cara que me introduziu ao metal. Se eu sou um batera de metal, eu até falei isso no final, né? Que esse amuleto aqui eu vou levar para sempre, né? Porque se não fosse ele, a música dele, eu não seria o Aquiles que eu sou hoje, né? E aí, o terceiro foi o cara que me fez entender as coisas que eu queria tocar futuramente, que foi o Kiko Freitas, que também já passou aqui pela live. E o quarto foi o Jim Castronovo, que foi o cara que eu comecei, que eu falei assim, eu quero tocar que nem esse cara, né? Entendi? E, cara, tipo assim, você ouvir pessoas como o Nicko ou como o Jim Castronovo falando, né, das suas conquistas, quando a gente começou a live aqui, que ele falou, pô, parabéns pelo teu prêmio de 2 bumbos pela Modern Drum, aquilo é uma coisa que assim. para, assim, você não acredita, né? Ou então, no final, quando ele falou um monte de coisas legais aqui, é muito foda. Então, eu só quero agradecer vocês todos, quero agradecer toda a galera que mandou superchat, quero agradecer o Cássio Cunha, que apareceu aqui também, o meu parceiro de banda, o Edu Falaschi, que apareceu, que mandou a pergunta aqui, obrigado, o Adair Dalfenbafo, o Gerson Lima Filho, eu só tô falando as pessoas que eu consegui ver, né? E aqui também, ó, a mulher que manda no Luffy, a Rebeca The Baker, que ela detona o Luffy, faz o Luffy tipo, marchar do jeito que ele tem que marchar, né? E é isso aí, o Luffy vai estar aqui no dia 29, eu quero agradecer o Luffy que ele estava aqui também, né? Então é isso aí, galera, obrigado. Gilson, antes de eu finalizar, eu deixo você finalizar esse dia histórico na nossa vida com uma live de quase 3 horas. Que dia, Gilson?
Animal.
1 da manhã no Brasil. Tem 1.000 pessoas aqui, foda. Ó,
agora é meia-noite aqui.
Tem 2.700 likes e tem 11 dislikes que, né, eu não entendo também, né? Pensa bem, cara,
É o pessoal que não fez aula de inglês.
Se eu tivesse a chance, cara, de tipo assistir uma live de um cara icônico como esse, né, e
com
alguém
perguntas do seu país, né? Com alguém do seu país.
E com perguntas icônicas e cara, o Nico falou, a gente tá com 4 meses de epidemia. Essa é a 3ª live que ele fez, cara. Então, porra, puta consideração, porque ele sabe o quão importante ele é na minha vida, né? Olha ali quem apareceu também, meu parceiro, Fábio Laguna. Falei de você aqui, Fábio Laguna. Falei de você aqui, que de vez em quando a gente fala que a música não gruva. Tipo calcinha grande, que não entra na bunda. Fica aquela marca feia. Ó, tá que nem a calcinha que não entra na bunda. Fica feio.
Abração pro Fabão.
Finaliza aí. Finaliza,
Aquiles,
parceiro.
Quando, acho que uns 3 meses atrás, você me falou assim, ó. Legal, Gilson, eu gostei desse aplicativo aí pra fazer live. Eu vou te colocar junto com os maiores bateras. Cara, eu te confesso que eu não imaginava que ia ser assim.
Não,
simplesmente todos os meus ídolos.
Outra pessoa que apareceu aqui também agora, o Apolo Festinha. Meu parceiro,
tava aí,
meu parceiro de 12 anos de trabalho junto, cara parceiro pra caralho, sabe muito bem, sabe todas as manias que eu tenho relacionadas ao Iron Maiden, que se tiver tocando uma música no playlist do Somewhere in Time, mesmo que você tiver feito um show há 2 horas atrás tocando Somewhere in Time na íntegra, não pode pular aquela música, tem que ouvir de novo. Se o carro para e a música tá tocando, a música tá tocando, você não pode desligar o carro até acabar. Então, essa galera sabe muito bem da importância que tem essa banda. E eu também quero agradecer todos os meninos malditos, né? Que essa música Revelations levou tanto tempo pra gente fazer, porque eu fiquei enchendo o saco dos caras. Faz de novo. Então, quero agradecer meus parceiros de banda, Fabrício Fonseca, Roberto Barros, Cristiano Wortmann, Rafael Dafras, Fábio Laguna. Ficou sensacional. E ele comentou, né, que ele viu algumas coisas da gente tocando e tal, que ele achou sensacional, que soou muito bem. Então, porra, isso, cara, eu não sei como mensurar a felicidade que eu tenho. Ó, o Betão apareceu aqui, o Betão Barros, um dos maiores estudiosos da história da música brasileira, estava aqui. Então, cara, tipo, tô muito feliz pra caralho, eu tô muito feliz de poder dividir esse momento com vocês, né, que vocês que fizeram a TV Maldita. E o Gilson, quando ele me falou, eu falei assim, pô, Gilson, como você que tá me ajudando a fazer isso, entendeu? Eu quero você em todas as lives. Ele falou assim, pô, mas o que eu vou fazer nas lives? Eu falei, não, você vai participar, você vai começar a fazer e você vai pegar o jeito, né? Então o Gilson é uma pessoa importante e não teve ninguém assim. Já teve gente que até falou assim, pô, olha aqui quem apareceu aqui também, ó. O Rodrigo Carmo, o Ganso, o cara que gosta do Choquito, meu parceiro antigo de distribuidora da Paz no Brasil, o Adriano Paper, sensacional, que tá aqui, parceiro. Então, toda essa galera que tava aqui, Daniel Piquet tá aqui também, meu parceiro, que ganhou junto comigo meu DVD na Modern Drama de melhor DVD educacional de 2014. Então, cara,
todo mundo aí.
Todos ainda. Vocês,
Pedro Tinello tá aí.
O Pedro Tinello tá aqui, um abração também. Cara, é o seguinte, todos vocês que de alguma de alguma forma que vocês fazem parte da minha vida musical, que vocês participaram, que vocês já viram, que vocês não entenderam muitas vezes as minhas loucuras com questão ao Iron Maiden. Tipo assim, hoje ficou claro, entendeu? Por quê, né, cara? Eu sou muito grato de poder ter essa proximidade com todos os meus ídolos, cara. Foi sensacional, né? Sou muito feliz, sou muito abençoado, sou muito grato a Deus por tudo isso. E eu acho que é isso, né, cara? Quando você deseja realmente uma coisa e as pessoas e o mundo inteiro vê que você dedica a tua vida para aquilo, o mundo conspira para que você consiga, entendeu? Logicamente que tem uma minoria que torce contra, mas o mundo do bem é muito maior e o bem sempre vencerá o mal. Pode ter certeza disso. Então, Gilson, eu quero que você fale, olha aqui quem apareceu, meu primeiro batera, o meu primeiro aluno de batera, o Peixoto, o Luciano Sorrentino, que vai estar aqui com a nossa live, aqui junto com a gente, um parceiro sensacional. Então, obrigado, Gilson. Agora você fala tchau, que agora eu vou pro petisquinho. Tá. Hoje vai ser uma loucura. Estou muito feliz.
Eu vou deixar uma historinha para encerrar, que eu gostaria de ter falado isso pro Nico, mas ia soar muito idiota, tipo um fã, assim. Que eu queria saber.
Eu acho que eu sei o que é.
Queria deixar registrado nessa live que em 2008, quando o Iron Maiden esteve em Porto Alegre, eu estava lá na turnê, e logo depois da terceira, quarta música, eu estava muito próximo do palco. Eu pensei, eu tinha um celular velho que eu detestava aquele celular, estava sempre bugando, e eu tirei o chip e pensei, eu vou jogar no palco, que é para esse celular morrer no palco do Iron Maiden e eu lembrar a última vez que ele esteve na minha mão e depois ele esteve no palco do Iron Maiden. Acontece que o Bruce Dickinson viu e o Bruce pegou o celular, botou a bateria, fez de conta que ligou para a mãe dele e ficou uns 4, 5 minutos fazendo piada com aquele celular na mão. Tá
na net isso aí, né?
Tá na net como um dos maiores momentos mais engraçados do Iron Maiden, e foi eu que proporcionei esse momento, porque eu joguei o celular no palco e ele fez a chamada do Wasted Years, cara. Né, até uma outra coisa que eu tinha curiosidade era saber como é que eles se ligam com esses improvisos do Bruce, né, cara? Porque ele dá umas deixas assim do nada. Wasted Years! E o cara tá lá afinando baixo.
Tomando uma água.
Tomando uma água. Então, pô, animal ter falado dessa história aqui, deixar registrado que fui eu que joguei o celular. Obrigado, Aquiles, por esse momento,
que
cara.
Isso, obrigado.
Não tem palavras para agradecer.
Que isso. Amanhã a gente tá aqui de novo, né?
3 horas.
3 horas. Nós somos trabalhadores, né, Gilson? A gente está fazendo uma coisa pela música brasileira, para toda a comunidade baterística. A gente está trazendo informação de qualidade gratuitamente para vocês. E quando isso tudo acabar, quando a gente voltar a tocar ao vivo, as pessoas vão se lembrar disso, porque isso aqui vai ficar aqui para sempre. Então isso aqui é parte da história da bateria do Brasil e eu fico muito feliz que a gente está contribuindo, porque o mercado precisa continuar e a gente sem o mercado, nós não somos ninguém. Então a gente tem que lutar para isso. Então eu acabei de ver também um monte de outros bateras aqui. Eu quero coraçãozinho, deixa eu ver como é que faz.
Você tá certo, acertei.
Aí, bonita. Ó. Esse ficou perfeito. Demorou menos. Bom, aqui. Então é isso aí, galera. Obrigado. Eu vi o Demetrius Locks aqui também. Obrigado para ele. Eu vi que você mandou um chat aqui, mas ficou para a União Musical. Galera, muito obrigado. Estou feliz demais de ter compartilhado esse momento sensacional da minha vida. Agora vocês viram como é que eu fico quando eu estou na frente do Nico. Eu viro o Aquiles de 16 anos e eu fico muito feliz que vocês tenham visto isso pessoalmente aqui. Obrigado, Gilson. Boa noite, galera.
Valeu.
E
amanhã
tudo de bom para vocês. Amanhã a gente está aqui com quem, Gilson?
Robertinho Marçal e Ramon Montagna. Vai ser
animal. Isso aí.
Isso aí.
Amanhã é isso aí, galera.
Bate horário
muito
normal,
obrigado.
22 horas.
Boa noite. 22 horas. A gente tem um compromisso amanhã com a TVMaldita. Valeu. Tudo de bom. E, agora vocês sabem de onde vem a força. Obrigado. Valeu, galera. Tchau. Boa noite. Valeu. Gilson. Falou. Tchau.